United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
And just to make sure everyone is aware that we are being videotaped, I guess I've been neglected to mention that. So any comments and statements from the public? Mrs. Dufo.
I tried to write a few things down, so I will be concise and brief. But I have looked at been reading the paper about budget cuts and such, and see what you're facing this coming year. And I'm standing here not only as a former music educator in the school system, but really as someone who was born and raised in Westport, someone who attended all the schools here, and someone who had her 3 daughters come through the school system. When I was here at the high school as a freshman in 1967, we had a full band, we had a chorus, and that was 45 years ago. And unfortunately, like now, we didn't have those extra courses like music history, music theory. And I had to go to a private music teacher to get that education, just so that I could pass the music entrance exam to get into college. And I look at the students that are here now, and the same thing is happening to them. They're going to other teachers to get that education. And I look at it and go, 45 years have gone by, and we're still at that point. And we weren't always there. When I got out of college, I made a promise to myself that someday I really wanted to be hired in Westport and make a change in the program. And I was very fortunate that I was given that opportunity. And with my colleagues here, we were able to build up a program, build this program to a place where our students were actively involved in all aspects of the music program. Our elementary schools perform musicals and concerts twice a year. Our middle school choruses and bands literally completely filled the stage. The high school marching band could march down the street and compete with Fall River, Swansea, Somerset, Dartmouth, with all those bands, and they could hold their heads up high. Over the past 12 years or so, with the budget cuts, changes in schedules, staff, the loss of several excellent teachers, it's led us down to a path where we are now. And I feel right now, the last 12 years, we've been on a roller coaster ride with the music program. And I feel like we're heading to the bottom of the hill. And it's not because we don't have interested students. That's quite the contrary. We have very talented students here. One has been accepted to Boston Conservatory. Another one stood on the stage in March at Symphony Hall and sang with the All-State Chorus. We had students performing with the Southeast District Chorus in band over the last several years. We have some of our high school students performing in professional theater groups. I had a chance to perform last December with some students that I had here in elementary school. So the interest is there, and that list goes on. And right now I like to compare our current program to a sandwich. We have an excellent program at the West and at the middle school, and that's kind of, I look at it like the meat and anything else you want to put in the sandwich. But the bread that holds it together is the kindergarten and the high school program. And this year, the kindergarten music program was eliminated, and the high school program remained at part-time. And I feel like we don't have that bread to hold the program together. And basically, we just don't have a sequential program anymore. And there's been countless research done showing the value of music and arts in education, higher test scores being one of the most significant. And if you think of changing that half-time music teacher to full-time, think of it almost as an investment in improving our test scores. We want our middle school students to come here and not look elsewhere for the high school. And I have always been a very strong advocate of that. Anytime people talk about sending their children elsewhere, I tell them to look at the high school. My own 3 daughters came here. They attended Westport High. They went on to college. The last one will graduate Friday with a degree in nursing. And they all came from kindergarten right through high school here. And they got an excellent education, and they were prepared to move on to college and then on to an excellent career after that. So in closing, I ask that you please give some serious consideration to keeping our high school program as a full-time high school program and allowing us to expand the music course offerings that we allow our students to have here at the high school. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Dufault.
Hi. I stood before you at the budget hearings and expressed how I would like the part-time position to be full-time, and I did kind of get a sense that you were very much on board with that. And that's what I would kind of like you to try to remember now, because I know now you have to cut $122,000, and that stinks. It really does. There was a perfect little newsworthy thing that went on Facebook, and it was from NBC 10 last week, that there is a school in Boston that was failing, and the principal made a very, what he thought at the time could be a career killer decision, where he reduced his security budget and put it into visual and performing arts. And that school has skyrocketed in their test scores, and their kids now are going to other schools who benefited from this. So a full-time music program benefits education, social, and emotional. And sometimes one leads into another. If a kid feels emotionally good about being in a group where he or she feels they belong, then the lights start turning on in the brain, and the test scores get better, and it's all good. It's all good. So it is a very good investment to kind of forget about, kind of don't even think about keeping that position part-time, and please make it full-time. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else? Thanks for your comments. I don't see Danny Marks here. Let's move on to the district determinant measures. Dr. Dargan.
Good evening. I'm going to talk this evening with you a little bit about district determined measures. As most of you are aware, last August 2012, the district began implementing the new educator evaluation. And there are now some changes.
You want to sit?
No, I'm fine. I'm okay. I'm good. Thank you. As part of that new educator evaluation, there were certain priorities. We needed to place student learning at the center. We needed to promote growth and development. We should be recognizing excellence. We need to set a high bar for tenure. And we need to shorten timelines for improvement. So the Department of Ed stresses that we want to ensure that each student in the Commonwealth is taught by an effective educator in schools and districts led by effective leaders. The educator evaluation is such that in addition to the 4 standards, educators working under their license will also receive 2 ratings. One is the summative performance rating, where teachers and educators working under a license will receive a rating of exemplary, proficient, needs improvement, or unsatisfactory. In addition to that, come the year 2015-2016, our educators will also receive a student impact rating. And based on student growth, our educators will be ranked high, moderate, or low. So again, this chart, you got to see this about a year ago. In addition, on the left-hand side to the summative ratings, what happens depending on that rating is whether a staff member will be put on a one-year self-directed growth plan. Those are typically for our teachers that did not have professional teaching status, or those that have professional teaching status typically will stay on a 2-year self-directed growth plan if they are proficient or exemplary. If they are ranked needs improvement, then they'll be put on a directed growth plan, and ultimately, if a teacher is placed on satisfactory, will be put on an improvement plan. Coming in another couple of years will be the rating of the impact on student learning. And depending on the summative ratings and the student growth, that teacher or educator will be rated low, moderate, or high. So what is the student impact rating? Well, the regulation says that it must be based on at least 2 years of data. Those are trends, as well as across multiple measures, so we're looking at patterns. We know we have statewide growth measures. We have the MCAS student growth percentiles, but we do know that only 17% of our educators are actually administering an MCAS in the content or the grade level that they teach. So the Department of Ed now has put out a regulation that district-determined measures will also be put in place. So an example right from the regulation says, in grade 5, we might have the MCAS student growth percentile. We'll look at that year 1. We'll look at the trends in year 2. But in addition, there should be another measure because, again, we're looking at trends and we're looking at patterns. So what is the value of good assessment? Well, with better assessments, we have better teaching, better learning and greater confidence, better student outcomes, and ultimately better opportunities in life. So good assessments benefit both the students and the teachers. So if we start with our district-determined measures, we'll have higher quality student data, which ultimately, I always say, assessment drives instruction. So that should trickle into better teaching and then ultimately improve student outcomes. So closely tied to one of the key goals of the new educator evaluation framework is to really promote student learning, student achievement by providing the educators with feedback for improvement. It's not a gotcha, it's how can we all grow and improve together. So again, based on the regulation, we're looking at 2 years at least of trends and patterns, and we will ultimately rate the educator under that license a high, a moderate, or a low teacher. So what is the definition? Well, right from the regulation, the definition of a district-determined measure is measures of student learning, growth, and achievement related to the Massachusetts curriculum frameworks, the Massachusetts vocational technical education frameworks, or other relevant frameworks that are compatible across grade or subject level district-wide. These measures may include but may not be limited to portfolios, approved commercial assessments, and district-determined pre- and post-unit and course assessments, and capstone projects. So in addition to student portfolios, ultimately looking at our senior project, that could be a capstone project. So the Commissioner just put out a memo on April 12th of this year asking all districts by this September to identify our already determined district-determined measures and also to disclose which ones we are piloting. Come February of 2014, if we do not identify district-determined measures, then the state will put out some acceptable district-determined measures, and thus ultimately we will need to use those. But for the first year, 2014-2015, we're going to collect the first year of data. The second year, districts will look at that data as well as the trends, and then ultimately our administrators will issue a student impact rating for all of our educators. The department strongly encourages positions to be accelerated so that ultimately we can get 2 years' worth of good data. So what's the minimum timeline? Come this school year, at a minimum, in August of 2013, we need to have an early grade literacy, that's K through 3. We need to have an early grade math, K through 3. We need to identify a middle grade math, as well as high school writing to text. And then ultimately we need to identify in the traditionally non-tested grades and subjects, such as the fine arts, music, and physical education, which district-determined measures we're going to use. Ultimately, this summer, the department will be issuing some exemplar DDMs that we may choose from. So again, the regulation specifies that the superintendent will ultimately have the final say in identifying and selecting the district-determined measures. Specifically, additional district-determined measures comparable across schools, grades, and subject matter district-wide as determined by the superintendent may be used in conjunction with MCAS student growth percentiles as well as MEPA scores, those are the English language learner scores, to meet this requirement, and shall be used when either MCAS growth or our ELL scores are not available. So the department now recommends some next steps. There's been a series of webinars to date. We've participated in 3 of them. Ultimately, we still have to look at determining the best approach to district-determined measures, as well as integrating assessments into educator evaluation, how we're going to report student growth, and how we're going to develop business rules and engaging staff. So the Department of Ed recommends that we identify a team of administrators, teachers, and specialists to focus and plan the district's work around our district-determined measures. They also recommend that we complete an inventory of existing assessments used in the district schools and identify and coordinate with partners that have capacity to assist in the work of identifying and evaluating assessments that may serve as district-determined measures. Our administrators have already completed a literacy assessment, so we know basically where we stand. We have an inventory now of assessments that are currently used in the district. And this year, several of our grade or content teams have started to implement mid-year and end-of-the-year assessments. One of the things, for instance, the new Go Math program at K through 4 and the pilot that we have in grade 5 and 6, they're trying out some of the different assessments to determine which one is going to be the most helpful and give them the most information. One of the things that we have to look at is assessment components, and if we are looking at homegrown or our own developed assessments, we need to complete a table of test specifications, an administration protocol. We need to identify the instrument. We need to identify the scoring method, and ultimately the documentation. So again, the Department of Ed supports identification of anchor standards for a subset of grades, and they will publish a document to assist with that in July. They're also overseeing the collection and the evaluation of quality assessments, and they will make those available to us, as well as the exemplar district-determined measures that they're recommending in July as well. And then finally, you've probably heard a little bit now about Edwin Teaching and Learning. The Department of Ed tells us that for the first time, Edwin is not an acronym standing for anything specific other than Ed represents a student in any of our schools, in any of our classrooms, and we hope that our students win. So thus the term Edwin. They have 2 functions right now. They have Edwin Analytic, which is replacing the old data warehouse, where through the security portal we'll be able to go in and we'll be able to look at the MCAS data. In fact, come next week, the English language learner data will be made available through that system. But they also have the teaching and learning system, and that's where our district is one of several districts across the Commonwealth, and we're piloting this tool right now. That's going to have several components and features. Some down the road will come at an expense if the district chooses to purchase this tool. But it'll be a tool to help enable educators to create lesson plans, curriculum units, and maps that ultimately are aligned to the frameworks. It'll give us the ability to search for and utilize standards aligned digitally through customized model units, as well as released MCAS items. And then it'll provide the ability to create and administer paper and online assessments to gauge student progress using resulting analysis and reports. And currently we have 3 of our staff members who have had the training, train the trainer model, and they are now working within their schools. One of our schools is looking at uploading their units, and another school is exploring the opportunity of the assessment bank and how useful that will be for us. So that's a big picture overview right now of district-determined measures, and as we come closer to the start of the next school year, I'll be able to come back and share with you some of the assessments that we have ultimately identified here in Westport.
Thanks, Ann. So, any of the members have any questions for Dr. Dargan? Michael?
As this is unrolling, it appears that there's some dates that either the state has missed on releasing. Is that the commercial assessments? So we're waiting for that list?
That's coming out in July, that they're going to, recommend some already what I call pre-canned or already publishable assessments that we could buy into, yes.
And
We haven't seen anything yet.
but when they come out with that, that's where there's some cost involved?
Correct.
What we choose, we're going to be buying those type assessments?
Correct. Whether we choose to purchase Edwin, the Teaching and Learning, which has the capability of an assessment bank, whether we decide to go with a publishing company, such as the math program that we did purchase this year, does come with a whole assessment bank, lots of different assessments, so the teachers are actually piloting them this year now to inform us on whether they're getting good data, because again, assessment should drive and change instruction and improve it, or ultimately are we going to work on creating our own homegrown assessments. And so, for instance, our science teachers, our 7th and 8th grade science teachers, actually teach in modules over at the middle school. And so how would we have an end-of-year assessment? Well, they're taking components of each of the modules that they teach throughout the year, and they're creating a final exam. So ultimately, the plan may be, come next August, to administer that final exam as a pre-assessment, and then ultimately at the end of the year be able to assess the youngsters and see was there indeed growth there. So we have lots of options. But we do have a staff who are willing to work. Last summer we spent time going through the modules for the implementation of the educator evaluation. And when we had our PD days in August, several of our teachers actually presented to the staff, to the faculty. And I have several teachers right now who are willing to dissect all of this information and actually in August prepare to roll this out with our staff. So it'll be teachers working with teachers.
Thank you.
Dr. Dargan, under the student impact rating slide, you mentioned 17% of teachers weren't teaching.
Only 17% of our teachers actually teach in a subject matter that MCAS assesses. So science, our English language arts, or our math teachers. When you then factor in our social studies teachers, our language teachers, our phys ed, our music, it's a very, very small portion of our staff that actually are right now holding that accountability rating with and for us. Now, not to say all of us don't have an impact, because certainly a foreign language teacher is using a lot of those skills and strategies. But as far as measuring student growth, it's not an assessment that regularly is reported in their area.
And that's our average, or is that the state?
That's the state's average. Yeah.
So 17% of the teachers
Across
have
the Commonwealth.
biggest impact on the MCAS scores, let's say. Is that a fair
So few
statement?
teachers. You figure none of our kindergarten teachers, none of our first grade. Now, ultimately, it's cumulative. It builds by the time they get to the third grade. But our kindergarten teachers, our first grade teachers, so it's just a really small percentage that we have that MCAS student growth percentile. We all own them, and it is ultimately success for all, but we need to come up with some other measures now to ultimately look at student growth. And the state says in addition to MCAS, we also have to have another assessment in those grades or subject matters.
Dr. Colley?
Yeah, one of the things that we expected was when they first came out with this and they talked about district-determined measures, was that they would allow districts to determine not just which assessments to buy, but which ones we could construct ourselves. We expected a lot more guidance from the state earlier on in this year. We have just started the webinars. I think it was February, the first one. And as we've been taking these webinars, one of the things that we discovered is for those grade levels or those teachers that do not teach a course that ends up in an MCAS, they're going to have to come up with 2 assessments. Those who have an MCAS as part of their assessment process for that grade level and that subject area, they still need to come up with another one. Now, as we went through the webinars, what we started to discover is that the state really, I don't want to say they're discouraging our creation of our own and choosing our own homegrown assessments, but that they're putting a lot of requirements that are paperwork, time intensive, and require a lot of technical know-how in order to comply with what the state wants us to present in order to say this is a good district determined measure. They want us to go through reliability and validity studies. They want us to create a manual as to how the test would be administered, analyzed, dissected. So we're a little concerned that as we go down this path, perhaps some of the district determined measures may end up being more, let's just say, bought curriculum assessments. For example, the Go Math curriculum, which could complement both the MCAS, but even in those grade levels that don't have MCAS, that is just one measure.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll need to come up with another one. Again, the state did back up the timeline from what we originally saw back a year ago when they started talking about district determined measures. This was the year for everybody to have them already done. Halfway through the year, they said, well, we'll give you what's left of this year and into next year to identify them, pilot them, and then tell us which ones you'll use. So I just wanted to be able to put it in perspective of where the state is going versus where we thought we were a year ago. Am I?
You're absolutely correct, and we're actually in fairly good shape because at least our staff are familiar with the terminology. They have been implementing now and collecting data. They're getting ready for an end-of-year assessment. They're talking about, is DIBELS a good enough assessment, or do we need something else? So these conversations have been taking place all year long because we thought that by September 1st we'd have to have everything already identified. So in really good shape, and we continue to talk about planning this summer so that we really are ready when the school year starts.
Dr. Darden, you mentioned the MCAS, but it seems like, we're pulling away from that. And how much of the MCAS scores?
The MCAS scores are still going to be important because we're still going to have the PPI, which is the Performance and Progress Index. However, the Commonwealth has recognized and realized that it really just isn't about overall how is your school or how is your district doing. It really is now coming down to student growth, and they want to see a minimum of 1 year student growth in every grade, in every contact. And that's how teachers will now be evaluated. So it really doesn't matter. I may be a third grade teacher, and if I have a student in my class who's not working at grade level, but yet I can document and show a minimum of 1 year's worth of growth, then I may be considered a high teacher.
Anyone else? And I'll just say, I could picture myself last year around this time, and maybe the year before around this time, saying the same thing, that it almost seems like, and I'm not saying it's the district or the state, I don't know, but we're always resetting the clock. Every year we're starting anew.
Mm-hmm.
And, we can't just continue to do that. We have to look back and, let's assess what we decided to do last year and see how that's working. 'Cause that may be working. But it just seems like every year, we're burning that bridge.
Yep.
There's no, we just forget about the
And I can
past.
tell you our teachers are feeling, the stress and the burden of all of this too. This is part of the regulation, part of the educator evaluation. And at another time, and we certainly have talked about it in the past, we also have retail, which is really changing our English language learner instruction as well as certification or endorsements too as well. So there's a lot on our educators' plates nowadays, and the feeling is when are we going to just have time to teach when we have everything else to deal with? But we're in good shape. We're making some good headway.
Thank you, Dr. Dunn.
You're welcome.
Next on the agenda, scholarships for FY13 college acceptance list.
I have included in your packet the FY12 scholarships, not so much so that you go back and relive the good news of the past, but just so you know that these very same scholarships and a few others that will be added to the list this year are basically in the process of being evaluated by committees both inside the school district and outside the school district. Those scholarships tend to be year after year scholarships for the most part. They may change a little bit as to how much money they provide each student that's awarded a scholarship. So you will be seeing a very similar list in a couple of weeks. Obviously, we do not release the names of the FY13 scholarships until the awards night here at the high school, and we'd like to invite you to that. We'll send you the date. I think it's in my phone, but my phone died, so I can't give it to you right now. But you'll have a very similar list. Some of the scholarships are fairly substantial. You have the Mid-City Steel, for example. It's about $1,500 to one student. The Benoit Scholarship, it's about $1,200. So you have some really good scholarships to students who are well deserving, and hopefully this coming June you'll be able to come and see the students receive those scholarships here in the auditorium. I do know that we will send you a list ahead of time. My only question is that, or my only request is that you do not spoil the fun for the students and the family who come here to the academic award ceremony to get the accolades that they so well deserve. I know some years past, school committee wanted to know ahead of time in case there was a question about any of them, so we will be sending that to you. I know I have a meeting with the high school for some of the internal scholarships coming up this week. So we'll be sending you information on the ones that we know of. Once we have that information, we'll send it to you. Just please keep it under wraps until awards night, and then you can always feel like you know ahead of time. The other information that we're providing you is, this is about maybe a week and a half ago, is the students that we had received information on as to where they have been accepted. Obviously, if you count them up, there are more acceptances and there are students who applied because they may have applied to more than one college and gotten acceptances to more than one college. And eventually, as we get a little closer, probably the first June meeting, we'll give you a list of where the students have actually accepted to go. So you also have that information. Sometimes students may get accepted to several universities or colleges, and depending on financial aid and their ability to participate in scholarships and such, may choose one school over another. So we always like to give you what we know as we receive it. So if you have any questions, let me know, and at the June meeting, we'll bring you where they are actually have chosen to go, or whether they've chosen to delay entrance into university or college, or gone into work, or gone into the service. And for some, we still don't know. But we'll give you the best information we have in June.
Thank you, Dr. Collin. It's a very impressive list, and there are very, very, very many smart kids in the school. I don't know. I wish more people were aware of the good things that go on here. But so we want to congratulate those who have gotten and will receive some scholarships. Melissa?
Anybody?
Okay, summer school, Dr. Collin.
Over the last couple of school committee meetings, we've talked a little bit about summer school based on what it would look like. I did speak to all the principals, went back and forth over how many days they would have programming for the students, how many sessions, how long the sessions would be, how many weeks, how many days a week in the summer. So this is basically a draft of a combination, going school to school, talking to the principals as to what we would envision would happen based on having the funding for a summer school type program. You also have the special ed programming. That one's more determined by what the IEP says the students need in terms of how many days, how much instruction, how many therapies they need, and therefore who we need to have in those programs. But for the academic program that is non-special ed driven, we would use a little bit of the Title I monies that carry over into this coming summer, and that would be a supplemental to the elementary and kindergarten programs. We're looking at about 5 weeks, 3 days a week between the kids moving from pre-K to K, all the way to those moving from the 3rd grade to 4th grade. 3 days a week, 2 sessions. We envision it probably one for ELA, one for math, although we may be able to have 2 teachers doing that depending on how many students sign up and how many students need it. At the middle school, where they have a different approach, where if students are failing 2 courses, and we want to go as far as to say, or failing the same course 2 years in a row, we would like to bring them back for summer school and do it again 5 weeks, but for the middle school, 4 days a week, giving them a little bit of an extra shot, because we would expect that then at the end of that program, hopefully they would be able to pass the end of the year assessments so we can move them up to the next grade level, or make sure that they have the skills to be in the next grade level and be successful. I also included a little bit of the information on the BCC program, which is the high school program. It starts with 8th graders going to 9th, 9 to 10, 10 to 11. Those students we've been able to program in. It's a blended program that has staff from BCC, staff from here at the high school. They get both some academic programming in ELA, math. This year it will include science, but they also get some career orientation and orientation as to what does it look like to be in college. And that has been very successful over the last few years for students needing credit recovery. We usually write a small grant that sometimes takes care of those students from 11th to 12th grade that need some credit recovery. That grant hasn't been even published yet as far as I know, so we don't know if we're going to have it. So again, I programmed a little bit of that. Last year we did the afternoons here, knowing that this is a very limited amount of funding that we have, perhaps using Odyssey Ware that allows the students a broader range of options for credit recovery may be an appropriate way to go with it. We would have the program for the summer, perhaps into the year, but at least students would be able to perform some credit recovery activities, not just the 11th to 12th graders that need it, but also any of those who need additional credit recovery and want to do a whole day program. They could go to BCC in the morning, which is paid by the grant, and they could come here and do additional work in the afternoon. In talking to the administrators, just so you know, they were very keen on the idea that students should at least be held accountable a little bit. When students when we didn't have any summer school programming, students were encouraged to go to summer school, and they would go to places like Dartmouth, Fall River, and other surrounding districts that had it, and they would charge our students anywhere between $200 to $250 for a course. And what we've noticed is that when it's completely free, sometimes it seems like students or parents don't pay attention. They basically decide, well, if I'm not paying for it, it's not that important. I don't need to show up, where we really want them to show up. So we've included a very small, kind of like a club, $25 to participate. If you're on free and reduced lunch, if you're on free lunch, you wouldn't pay. If you're special ed, you wouldn't pay. If you're reduced, it'd be a reduced price, and it would basically be, dollars for a few dollars for 5 weeks worth of programming. That would offset the cost of this program a little bit, so that you could end up with fitting the whole program within the $30,000 that we had estimated it would cost, along with a little bit of money from Title I, money from special ed that was already put into the budget, and a little bit of tuition.
And Dr. Card, that $30,000 is in the budget now, correct?
Well, it was one of those areas that was slated as an addition to our budget beyond the level service budget. So if there are cuts, obviously it's a new thing. We would have to cut somewhere else or reduce other lines in order to fund this program. But I wanted you to see what the program may look like before we discuss the actual funding of it, so that people would see how it would work.
Melissa?
Are these students, all the students be invited, or would it be just children who are in Title I, or what was the population for the students for the summer program?
It would be not just Title I students. That was one of the things we've always felt like was lacking in our schools. Title I is specific to students who qualify for Title I, both by virtue of being in a low socioeconomic bracket, and at the same time having low scores. But if you have low scores and you're not a low socioeconomic bracket and you don't qualify for Title I, in previous years there was nothing. So this year we'll combine the two. That's why we're saying the Title I will be supplemental too. And that would be all the way from pre-K all the way to 8th grade.
My question was similar, and as I'm looking at the cost to districts, this is total cost, not necessarily the operating budget, so that some of these costs may come out of Title I?
Yes, about $5,000 would go to Title I. I think that's on the second page. Title I supplement 4,500.
Okay, and second question I have, and I think this would be particular to the 12th grade credit recovery options. Are those options open to students that are not currently enrolled in the Westport High School, perhaps students that have become disassociated with the high school, to enroll in a summer program for credit recovery? And do we have an outreach program to bring that to their attention if in fact it is?
If you have students who have left the high school without graduating, we are under the responsibility to contact them every year. Sometimes we do that 3 times a year, beginning of the year, midterm of the year, and just before summer, to encourage them, yes, to participate in those. In the past, we used to encourage them to participate by going to other places like those summer programs provided by other school districts that they would have to pay for, their parents would have to pay for. But we didn't have anything like that. So at this point, yes, they would be able to participate. And like I said, if they are it may be a way for them to return to school if they wanted to. For those few students who may have run into academic or difficulties with the law, we also would invite them to come to those. And finally, although we haven't really talked much about it, there may be someday the possibility, if this becomes a part of our budget, that we could, just like other districts do, open it up on a tuition basis to, for example, if a student is visiting grandparents from New Jersey and they want to come to our school because their school over there said they wanted them to be in summer school, but the parents sent them to be with grandma for the summer, we could develop some kind of a tuition system. Again, at this point, if we ever did that, and I haven't heard anybody at this point because we don't even have a program to advertise, but if we had it, I think in the first year, the monies would just go back into the general fund, and then we would have to think about the mechanism, perhaps a revolving account to recover those costs.
Thank you.
Dr. Colley, you have the one of the columns is the staff needed. Do we have projected numbers?
Those would be if you have about 15 students per session. And again, I know some parents always say, I want to send my kid to summer school, and then they schedule their vacation smack in the middle of summer school, and then they go, well, I can't come. So one of the things I ask the principals is to try to target about 15 students, which this could be a very large number of students that participate, so that perhaps we can even improve some of the scores of some of those kids who are on the borderline, just under needs improvement or at needs improvement. But my experience has been you can plan for 15 and you really hope to get about 10, 12 in one classroom, which is not a bad number for one staff person to do 3 times a week for the summer.
Okay. Any other questions?
Well, with the 2 sessions, we're targeting 30 students.
Would be 30 students for ELA per grade level and 30 students for math.
And some of those will be in both. Is the
Some students could be in both, yes. It would depend on how they did. In other words, if a student does very well in math but not in reading or writing, I guess my hope is the parents would just sign them up for ELA and then let the child do other things for the summer and their time.
All right, anything else? Anyone? Dr. Colley, the Westport Middle School study update.
I've been in contact with Jason from CGKV. He's actually coming again tomorrow. This will be the 3rd visit in about a month, because what they're finding is a lot of the things that it's on the old prints or the prints really do not exist in real life. So a lot of the as-builts are not as accurate as they should be. So they keep coming back down because things don't match print to reality. The other thing that they discovered and they're trying to now estimate is there are other code requirements that get triggered whenever you do any kind of work to a building, depending on the scope and the size of the building. So they just got from the town how much the valuation is for the middle school, and their exclamation was, oh my God, that's very low. Which means on a percentage basis, if you estimate the value of your buildings to be very low, a very limited project may trigger those regulation, basically baseline trigger numbers. So if 1/3 of the value of the building gets improved upon, then you may trigger some regulations such as perhaps putting sprinkler systems in a building or having to comply with all the ADA regulation codes that were not in effect when the building was built and now would have to be taken care of. So that's where they're at this point. They're trying to figure out if we do the cleanup at the middle school and how much that is. They kind of have that. They just want to see what would that trigger in addition to if they were ahead and if we went ahead and did that. They're expecting to have something to us by a week or 2 from now.
A couple of questions. As I'm reading Jason's note, I see that he recognized that he didn't have structural drawings. When did the project start?
The project started, I want to say, January, February.
So from February to May, the progress is that he realized he didn't have structural drawings, if I'm reading this correctly. The other issue that I wanted to suggest, and I don't know if it fits under their schedule is they're doing this study, but that's both the water and septic conditions as utility services for the building. I would imagine there is a water quality test that we do on a regular basis where it is a public water supply and some condition report of the existing septic system. So that might help them in terms of background, similar to...
The issue as to the prints, just to reiterate, was when they came down and took a look, and then they made notes. He came down with another engineer, and when they went back, they noticed that the prints didn't match what they found. So then that's when they asked if there were any as-builts, which are the ones, the schematic drawings that he was looking for. We found a couple, but they may never have been created as they went ahead and put the building together. So that's why he's coming back down to verify that the few little prints that we found, that they have everything they need. If not, they're going to have to go by whatever they found once they crawled up into the attic and the basement of the building.
So, Dr. Collins, so they're telling you in a couple of weeks they will have something?
That's what he said to me.
It does seem odd to me also that, all this stuff, they just, realizing some of this stuff now. Okay. So maybe at the next meeting, Dr. Colley, we'll have an update, or we'll have the report.
He knows I will bug him. And I will ask him about the septic and the water as well.
Yeah, I would imagine that would be all part of that study. Dr. Colley, FY13 budget update.
FY13 budget update. Melissa and the staff, principals, department heads, we have been working really hard at trying to figure out what still needs to be encumbered and why it hasn't. But I think what you have in front of you, the FY13 budget update, would match the expenditure analysis report that you get on a monthly basis. There are quite a few things that we were hoping that people would have already put into POs. I've talked to all the principals, make sure they do that. So when you go through, there's a couple of numbers here that you are, I think, familiar with. If you take a look at the projected salaries, we have a balance, a remainder of about $72,000, almost $73,000. And then when you look at the unencumbered balances in just the many general ed lines for expenditures, if you look underneath that, there's a lot of things that, like projected utilities, course reimbursement, legals to be paid, the MASBO audit, the copier lease that didn't get into this expenditure report. So even though we have been trying to put in POs as we go along, principals don't like to put in POs until we're closer to the end of the year for some of these things, in fear that, if we don't have money towards the end of the year, I would say don't spend it. So they've done what they could. So what you see is that out of the $428,000 that's still unencumbered or would appear unencumbered on this expenditure report, we're planning to spend at least, or we have already put in for spending $313,000. when I went back to the staff, one of the things that, for example, I had asked Mike Duart and Kim to this year put some money aside towards the end of the year. If we needed it, we would use it. And the need that has come up to the top or surfaced to the top is maintenance of our security systems. So even though it hasn't been encumbered, we'd like to put some money towards that. Other years it's been things like the gym bars on the bleachers that were required by ADA and for safety reasons. So there's some things we do every year at the end of the year. The admin technology, basically we found that some of our computers, once the basically it's a big network switch that died this past week when it went. All the old computers would not talk to the new one, so we're trying to fix that. Reading and writing instructional supplies, we hadn't encumbered it because we're still working with the teachers to try to determine exactly what programs and what materials they want to use. And the same thing in each of those other schools. In terms of the instructional supplies, I did go to the principals and say, you have money in your accounts, or we can transfer from one school to the other. If one school's not going to use all their money, what do you need? And basically these are the things that they gave as lists. There's still some monies left in the SPED area. Again, there are a couple of things that have kicked some money back. We did get a student that we had encumbered more money than we needed to for both transportation and programming. So you still see $11,000 in programming and about $26,000 in transportation. So overall, if you take a look at all the budget lines that have remaining accounts that are, or remaining amounts that are not encumbered, we're estimating about $110,000. And that's hopefully after we take care of things like maintenance of the security systems, the admin technology here at the high school and the administrative wing, and then a lot of the materials and textbook supply issues that the principals identified for this year.
Any questions for Dr. Colley? Michael?
Yeah, I just, as we're looking at the committed expenses, these are expenses that we're projecting before the end of the year that may or may not require transfer.
Some of them will require transfers. So, for example, one school may have money in a supply line that they're saying they're not going to use, but the elementary school may say, hey, I need that. So you would see a transfer.
And
the same thing with the technology ones, because those lines were not there when the piece of equipment died. It just died.
so the ones that are the regular ed expense report,
Those were ones that we have already talked at this table, the ones on the top.
right?
The ones on committed expenses, those are the new ones that you will see.
Right. I was just showing some differentiating the difference between the two lists. So these are anticipated through projection.
Right.
And I think my biggest question is we still have months left, through July 1, basically. And there may be some unforeseen expenses. So keep us informed on that. But these right now are what we anticipate. Not to backtrack into the utilities services for the different buildings, but I think it may also be prudent to review the water quality tests for all buildings and the condition of septic and the repair plan for all buildings. I know that that's, in past years, has been one of those expenses that has been somewhat discretionary. We try our best to include a plan for that, but I would like to see if there's any need in that area.
Dr. Colley, I'm sorry, sir.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Melissa.
Under the transportation reports where it says transfer to cover transportation salaries, where is that getting transferred from?
It's going from, what happens is at the beginning of the year, we use our budget monies for, like, Michelle Raposa, and then we never budget enough because we intend to take money from the revolving account and transfer it into that salary line. This year, because we had an increase in the fees, we have more money in our budget that we can put into that salary line. So we'll have a transfer out to her line.
So this isn't the revolving account, though, or is it the transportation?
Well, it's going from transportation. Let me see how I explain this. Because we took more money into the revolving account to pay for the actual transportation cost, we have additional funding left in our transportation lines that now is transferred into not expenses but into salary. So it's within the same department from expense to salary lines.
Okay. And that van that's listed, is that the van that was going to be?
We had a student going out of district, and we encumbered a certain amount because we expected the student would go for X number of days. And when the student came back, basically as we went through this exercise, Melissa noticed that we hadn't backed down the number of days, and that's the amount that's left in that account when we did that. So in other words, if we budget for the whole year, we encumber a large number because the student was going to a very far away program.
I'm talking about the van purchase. Is that the van that we were going to utilize for the, see how it says transfer to cover van purchase? I'm assuming that $20,000 is to purchase a van.
Yes.
So that's the van that we're talking about.
Mhm.
Okay.
Again, that would be one of those things that has come up, whether we do it out of this year's funding or go to town meeting and let the town meeting decide to fund it through capital plan.
Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Colley, I also had heard not too long ago about I'm not sure, but a proofer or a steamer or one of the cafeterias that.
If we do that, basically Michelle wants to wait till the end of the year because it's the lunch account is a revolving account. If she gets to the end of the year without anything breaking, she wants to basically do it over the summer if she has to, which is, I believe it's the one in the middle school that's really giving her a hard time, and she can't get any parts anymore.
Right, so I mean that is on the.
But it would come out of the revolving, not out of this. Although we could take it out of this and leave it at the revolver.
And the 110 at the bottom does not include any revolving account.
No. Remember you asked? And basically for next year, we're going to reduce some of those because we reduced the fees, and we're going to reduce the transportation one as well.
But that's not reflected in here.
No.
Is it?
No. Melissa, if I may, Dr. Colley, some of the positions get paid from different line items. And that's what that transfer is just, that's one of those positions that the payroll comes from different lines, and that's just a transfer of that into that salary line. So it's how it's been, it's what we do. It's how every year it's done that. Michael?
So with the explanation on this transfer to cover transportation salaries, have we adjusted our line item for the FY14 budget for transportation salaries, so we don't require, or is that something that,
We could, but we have not done that. At this point, we could take some of that. If we do that, then we would have additional funding in next year's budget. But that was not something that I put into my recommendations at this point, because it's a substantial amount of funding that we wanted to reduce the transportation line by. We could do it that way. My question then would be, where would that money be targeted to? We could certainly do it for salaries. It certainly would be appropriate, because she does do that kind of work. Or we can transfer it to other concerns, such as if we have additional maintenance of security systems that we may want to do after phase one, what I would call phase one.
yeah, no, what I'm actually trying to understand a little better is we have a need in our FY13 on our transportation salaries account to finish the year. So there, or not. In other words, we're
You're saying to put it into next year's as a...
no, I'm not looking, I'm saying this is FY13, and if we don't reduce the 14 to cover transportation salaries, we wouldn't have the money to pay the salaries.
No, we would. We just would take it more out of our budget than from here. In other words, because you did not want additional funding to go into the revolving account and remain as an additional excess in transportation, I'm trying...
So it's currently revolving account.
Yes.
And is that the only salary? Okay, so that 14 is, for FY13, if we weren't making any transfers, is allocated through the student fee account.
For next year. So again, that's what I'm saying. You didn't want additional funding to go into that account, so I kind of put the stop there so that an additional amount would fall into the remainder, or could be used to transfer for other things in this year. Although at this point, I'm saying, unless we can identify ticket items that would be, for example, sewer pumps or things of that nature, I think it would end up going to that bottom line of 110. So in other words, if I didn't do the transfer, you'd end up with about 125,000 left. But it wouldn't go into that line. It would go into the revolver.
Okay, then in order for me to make a notation on my copy for FY14, where do I put FY14? Transfer to cover transportation salaries for FY14, or?
No, this is only within this year.
Right, so we're transferring out of SPED because we have a deficit of transportation salaries in FY13.
Actually, that one is out of the regular transportation. In other words, the one that you see for SPED is to the good, meaning we have additional funding in SPED. We're using funding from this year, the regular transportation, and putting it towards salaries instead of the letting it go into the revolving account, so there's more money in the revolving account.
I understand that. I still don't understand the line item that says transfer to cover transportation salaries. Did we have an unanticipated increase in transportation salaries?
No, we had an additional amount of money in transportation this year. When I think it was about a month ago, the school committee decided that you didn't want additional funding going into the revolving account as an excess. The only way to do that is to stop it from going into an excess. The only way to do that is to spend it. The only thing that I have left to spend it in is salaries, which then releases that amount into the budget so we can spend it on books and
Thank you.
whatnot.
Melissa?
So, you said that this transportation account is not the revolving account. It's not the revolving, so it's just a transportation line item. So then the salaries, it must have been in regular salaries and then transferred into the transportation. So where this is a positive, this must be 14,000 more up here, and that's, because you're gonna have a debit and a credit. So it must have come from somewhere else to go into transportation, correct? Okay. Now, so, and the final question is the money that's coming in for transportation, it's not going in, it's still going into the revolving account, it's not going into another account, the actual revenue that comes in, is that correct?
The revenue goes into the revolving account,
Okay.
yes.
All right, just wanted to make sure I was understanding. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Anything else? Anyone?
May I ask one other question in case somebody has, I like the idea of looking at the septic system, although my recollection, and I will ask Mike Dewart, I believe the two pump that were the oldest, we switched out last year when one of them failed, and then we went in and found out the other one was also failing. Thank God. And the same thing with the well pumps. But I will ask, is there anything else that's not in the hundreds of thousands of dollars? I know we've asked about a lot of things over the years. The parking lots are a big ticket item that I know we can't fix with these kind of funding, but is there anything else that...
The gym floor at the MAC needs a paint job.
No?
The gym floor, I'm sorry, at the West.
I'll find
Gym
out.
at the West could use a paint job.
I'll find out about the gyms.
We have the electric system here too.
It's about 125, 150. That's what I'm saying. There's, unless we wipe out everything.
Right, and I know there's a long list, but, people have come to me and asked about the quality of the water, and environmentalists have asked about, when I say environmentalists, I guess I'm categorizing, but I've heard concerns of and not just for schools, throughout town,
Yep.
on the operation of septic systems, and I think we should get just make sure that Mike's comfortable. If there's anything we can do.
I know that our well water gets tested on a very, very, very regular basis, but every so often, especially when we got long periods of rain, we sometimes have issues with the water quality. Not necessarily because of anything we've done. It's just in the ground soil itself, usually from surrounding areas or just from years and years of deposition into the soils. But I will definitely ask, and if you have any ideas of who to talk to about a better, opinion as to what we could do in terms of safeguarding the well water, I'd be more than open to talk about it. Again, some of those things may be a way to kind of plan for the future, is to get somebody out here to look at it and study it and say, you may be okay for now, but 5 years down the road, you may want to think of this.
Another thing that was mentioned to me is fans at the elementary school in the gym. It's very hot in there, and she can't keep the door open. Fans
Oh yeah,
in
now
the
that
gym.
we're closing
She can't
everything.
keep-
Fans and all those.
Well, she can't keep the door open for safety reasons. So when it gets hotter,
Okay.
it gets hot in there. There's no air movement.
Yeah, it wasn't decided. Okay. Thank you.
Dr. Colley, in our packet, you have the
Analysis report, the expenditures, is that, want to talk about that now, or?
Basically, the expenditure report tracks the same sheet you have here, where you have the regular ed salary balances. That's the top two lines. One's the regular ed, and the other one is the special ed balances. So basically, the expenditure report is reflected in this one sheet, basically the one sheet that you have that I just went over, demonstrates where the surpluses are and where we think they're going to go by the end of the year. The one thing that's in the regular expenditure report that you get is, and again, Mike and Ms. Pacheco mentioned the revolving accounts are in the back if you want to take a look at those balances. You do have the preschool at negative 28, but that's because we're still got 2 more months of collecting dues, or basically the preschool tuition. Use of property, we spent quite a bit of it basically to offset utility costs, so we probably will have that zero out. Lost materials. This is one that I'm going to task Dr. Dargan to target for next year. I know a lot of the principals are leery, and many of these are older books, but rather than spending it, we may do one in little bits and pieces. We may actually target some of the new materials that we've been envisioning out of that fund. Student athletics, again, you got the information last week or 2 weeks ago about the middle school having a revolving plan for replacing equipment. I know Jason is working on the same. We probably will see him, if you don't mind, closer to the the sports awards. I asked him to do the same thing the middle school did, so you will see his plan to make sure every year we're replacing some of the old equipment or uniforms. Insurance claims, that's very, very little. School choice, that will basically disappear this year. We have a vote coming up further down on the agenda. Scholarships, that's money that gets put into our accounts and then we disperse them as scholarships get awarded year after year. E-rate, we pretty much use it every year. We still have a little bit of a balance, but I know we spent some of it already. It just didn't hit this warrant, so it's not listed in there. Again, there's the transportation that you had asked to cut, so we will revisit that one. And then the smaller ones, the continuing ed, that Dr. Dargan uses for little things here and there, mostly curriculum related. And the school lunch, right now, again, we said 2 months of revenue, but I think we will end either flat or maybe a little under the $68,000 for the year. And circuit breaker, we're waiting for the last payment, which we're hoping will cover the 44 deficit that's sitting there now, and we will also cover the part of the prepayment that we had agreed to.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Collin.
Tony, can we take these out of order? Because I'm assuming based on what people, so that we're not sitting here and filling things out.
That's what I was going to suggest.
Yeah, let's do that.
Question on this budget.
That way we can get the budget stuff out of the way.
Yeah, I was actually looking at White House.
Tony, before you jump, can I ask
Yes.
one question on the revolving accounts?
Sure.
On some of the revolving accounts, I'm just wondering, for instance, the school lunch, do we anticipate any revenue into that account besides the purchase, from the federal government?
Usually federal government is a part of it, and the other part of it is the actual student purchasing of lunches.
So that goes into this account? Mm-hmm. And we don't anticipate any reduction based on this sequestration on the federal payment? And is there one more payment scheduled from into the school lunch account before July 1?
There's two.
There's two more
There's
coming
2 more
from federal.
months at least, and plus the actual payments of the students as they buy their lunches over the next 2 months. That's why I was saying we carried into the year 68,000. I think at the most we will end up with no change, perhaps a little less. Again, because this year our expenses increased due to the cost of the more fresh materials being bought, like fresh vegetables and salad, because of the increased requirements from the federal government. I have not, and I know Michelle just went to a workshop, and nobody's talked about how sequestration would affect the lunch program. Title I, all we have heard is that perhaps a reduction of 5%. But nobody's talked about school lunch yet. And like I said, I know she was at a meeting last week, I believe Wednesday or Thursday, so they haven't talked about it.
Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and jump ahead to the action agenda, FY14 budget discussion and FinCom update. Kelly, anyone want to start?
Yep. We attended the Finance Committee meeting on April 29th, where they were finalizing their recommendations for the town warrant articles on all of the budget items. I'm happy to report that we actually were reinstated back to our level services budget request of $695,700. So instead of 122, we're looking at $82,000 from the budget that we had originally proposed that we need to pull back on. 30,000 of that was directly related to savings in utilities for fuel, gas, I don't remember what it was. It was a utility savings because of a new contract that was negotiated. The expectation is that the school side would save approximately 30,000. So that brings us back to about 52,000 that we need to look to shift from the budget as opposed to the original 122 because 30 already got absorbed. So the FinCom vote was 9-0. They had a discussion. There was suggestion that money should be put in stabilization. They took that money out of stabilization. That freed up 30,000. They moved some money from the police department so that he would pre-purchase a car this year, taking it out of next year's budget. That freed up another 30-something thousand. So by the end of their shifting, they were able to push back the 40 that had brought us under our level services budget.
Melissa, you want to add? Okay. Yeah, like Carolina said, the FinCom seemed very supportive, and we want to thank them again for their hard work. Michael?
Yeah, before we get into if it's appropriate in terms of the budget subcommittee, I did have a question on pretty much the process that starts tomorrow night with the annual town meeting. As much as I appreciate the FinCom's recommendation, my understanding is the budget that will be put on the floor will have had to have been adjusted by the Board of Selectmen this evening. I think they're meeting this evening. So the FinCom recommendation gets forwarded on to the Board of Selectmen for any adjustments that they made at that meeting? Is that part of the process?
No, I do not believe that is true. The Board of Selectmen meeting tonight is an executive session. I don't think there's an open meeting. I think it's just an executive session. And the FinCom is the one that presents the actual final budget to town meeting floor. It is not the Board of Selectmen.
Right.
The town administrator was at the FinCom meeting, and he made some suggestions of monies that wanted to be moved because of the Board of Selectmen had made some suggestions, and they took their recommendations as well into account, and so they actually refunded some monies into the town administrator's line item because they had pulled 20,000 out. They actually put the 20,000 back as a result of the shuffling that they did. My understanding is that the FinCom is the one that presents the budget to town meeting, not the Board of Selectmen.
Michael, quick.
Yeah, the budget that will be presented will have been a budget put together by the Board of Selectmen, and then the recommendation comes from FinCom, so I don't know if that affects the changes. I'm cautious to take any action beyond where we were at previously until we know that the Board of Selectmen is going to make those changes on the budget, because that is the process. FinCom doesn't have the authority to change a budget that the Board of Selectmen put forward, nor does the town administrator. So that's my concern on the
Michael,
as we get into our cuts.
I spoke to the town administrator today, and that doesn't seem to be the case. The FinCom budget is the budget.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. And
We'll know tomorrow night, and,
We'll know tomorrow night.
unless they authorize the
Well, I
town
mean-
administrator to become a town manager, that
No,
change would not be.
I've seen the actual document that is going to be presented at town meeting tomorrow, and it has our 695 number.
So that's
in
the
it.
recommendation from FinCom. That's the difference. That's
No,
all I'm
that's the
saying.
budget that's being presented at town meeting. It's not the recommendation, it's the budget that's being presented at town meeting. What happens to it once it hits the floor is a different issue, but that is the balanced budget that the FinCom voted on 9-0 to present on that slide that comes up behind them when they sit here tomorrow at town meeting. What people do on the floor to motion to whatever to change it is a different thing. It is not the Board of Selectmen's budget, and the Board of Selectmen do not have to vote to approve the budget. It's the same way that when we submit our budget, and we submitted our original budget was 777, and that got pulled back to 695, that's what the FinCom did. They pulled it back to 695. That's not what we originally voted on. And so now we have to come back and take that 695 number and pull it back from the 777. We originally were at the 122, and after they met and had vigorous discussion, they all felt comfortable with pulling back snow and ice, with some hesitation, but they believed that the school should be at their level services budget, and that's what they voted for. So
Okay,
I
but
am more than comfortable and secure. I've spoken to the chair of the FinCom that is what's being put on the floor, that it's only 82 that we need to look at. 30 of that is already being absorbed by the utilities, leaving $52,000 that we need to figure out where we're shifting from. And I see the music people here, and they presented, and so I think that,
All right, with that said, Dr. Colley.
I just want to clarify, my simple statement was referencing the Board of Selectmen's budget cannot be changed by FinCom. FinCom, it's their meeting tomorrow night. They can present as they wish. But the Board of Selectmen budget, as our budget now, equals an unbalanced budget. I understand that. But any suggested changes from the town administrator don't necessarily, I'm just looking forward to the update from, which I guess will come tomorrow night, that those changes are not, don't match where the Board of Selectmen's approved budget is at this time, as ours does not match.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Dr. Colley?
With the little bit of juice left in the phone, I just checked, and I think the moderator last Tuesday, whenever it was the FinCom had the meeting, needed to get the budget so that it get presented to the town. I think it's a week ahead of the town meeting, and he posted it. I just went and looked, and it's matching our number of the 15,875. So since last Tuesday, I've been working with the principals, with the central office staff, and we came with what we think is a doable, I'm not saying it's excellent, great, We still need to cut $52,000 in some way, shape, or form from the original requests that were already cut back quite a bit from all the needs that the schools identified over the course of the fall. So one of the things we put together for you is some information that would have the utilities. We haven't signed a contract, but we think we can go, instead of with NEASC, with NELMS for a study of the middle school. NELMS is a little bit less expensive, although they do tremendous work with just middle schools. It's an accreditation process. So we think we can shave 20 there. Instructional supplies and materials, we would cut a little bit. I know the middle school and the elementary school were looking for more money put back into their lines, but based on this year's spending and what they have to spend between now and the end of the year, I think they'll be okay with those cuts. And the rest is basically technology. And although I know Beth is sitting over there cringing, I chose technology because it's one of those areas that we've put a lot of effort into over the last few years, and that perhaps if we, depending on how it goes over the course of the summer in terms of hires, we may see a little bit of money that can then be put back into plug-in holes if other things die or computers need to be replaced. But at this point, that would be the only other place where I feel comfortable taking money out of. And I believe that comes up to the $82,000 that FinCom was looking for.
I make a motion that we adopt the superintendent's recommendations as his administrative staff put forward, and that we reduce the line items, $20,000 for the NEAS professional development, $30,000 for the utilities, the middle school office service $1,500, instructional equipment and supplies from the middle school $13,500, technology line item business office supplies $1,000, technology principal supplies $3,600, Mac computer purchase $6,795. High school, again, technology line item Westport High School instructional supplies $3,600, and technology line item Westport Middle School instructional hardware $2,000. $2,005.
Second.
Discussion?
And
I'd like to start if I could.
No, I want me.
Who?
Me.
Go ahead.
And that gives us the ability to fund the music position at the high school and bring it to full time. It also gives us funding for bringing the media specialists at the West to a full-time position that's also sorely needed. And it fills a position at the MAC as well. And I think you ladies can clap for yourselves, because the music position at the high school, if the motion carries, obviously, will go to full-time.
Tony? Yeah, Dr. Cully, as we look through this, first, I want to ask if there's a list of the cuts as the budget subcommittee voted on last week, and that we can compare this to. Do you have that list?
Honestly, I thought you guys were taking notes. I did not bring my notes with me.
Okay, I would like to just point out that, number one, the music program has never been in jeopardy since for the past couple of weeks, if not months. It wasn't on the list out of the budget subcommittee, and but secondly, this motion is to cut $82,000 from the budget, but we just heard some discussion that we didn't need to cut $82,000 from the budget, I thought.
30,000 of it is from the utility line item, the gas
I
utility
wasn't
contract
asking
saving?
anyone, so I don't know if she,
I was just answering your question.
I
That's
didn't have a
what's there.
question. We made a statement. Secondly, the NEAS professional development was brought up at the subcommittee meeting, or is this something that came to light after last week?
No, that was later. Over the course of last week, we had a few phone calls back and forth with NELMS to see. There are two different organizations. Each one has their own schedule, their own level of scrutiny, the different number of people that come to visit. So when we start asking for pricing, originally I thought it'd be the same as the high school, but it wasn't. So that's why, again, working over the course of the end of the week.
Let's discuss the motion.
Well, again, the motion is that there is a list that was approved from the subcommittee. NEAS, and it was 2 days ago. It was what day was that? Thursday? Tuesday. So last Tuesday, NEAS professional development came to light in the past 4 days. So are we sure we're not going to jeopardize NEAS by not having professional development?
Well, instead of NEASC, it'll be NELMS, and that's not the whole amount that's in the budget, so we're just cutting a portion after talking to them and asking what their price would be. So I'm pretty comfortable with that number. It's a less expensive process. There's enough money in the budget.
Right. So it's a savings that came as a result of our highlighting in the budget subcommittee. I asked to do a budget subcommittee report before we get into this, so I don't know why you want to shut me down. NEAS professional development. Professional development was talked about in the subcommittee meeting, so I remind you, because apparently we didn't take any notes. But there were some other items on that, and that's why you were in the meeting. I think you should have kept notes, and I'm just wondering if this came through the subcommittee process.
Melissa?
My one question, Dr. Colley, is I noticed that from the middle school we have $13,500 and then $1,500 for supplies, and I know we've talked a lot about supplies in the budget subcommittee. My only concern is that I know we do have some funding remaining this year, and if he's able to purchase those supplies this year, then that's great. I just don't want to shortchange our middle schoolers by reducing it by that much. So if you feel confident,
That was one of the things. You're right. A lot of these, in one way, shape, or form, were discussed at the budget subcommittee meeting. I had already explained that I had meetings already set up on Wednesday for the principals and Thursday for my central office administrators. And as we went through their budgets again with a fine-tooth comb, that's where we, one, made the change in terms of professional development. Rather than taking it out of general professional development, we targeted the NEAS process, because switching from NEAS to NELMS, we'd see some savings there that wouldn't affect other things that we could do out of professional development. The other one is this one. I did go to Alec. I did ask him, what is it you need? How much money do you still have in your budget this year? How much can we leave in your budget for next year that you would feel comfortable with? And that's where these numbers came from. So we did do exactly what you're saying. Again, the technology was a little bit more of a difficult interior discussion. And again, it's because I didn't want to go back to the principals and get even more out of them where they felt they had no more to give.
Michelle?
Yeah, I would just, to the motion, I would like to say that I wasn't in favor of what we did a couple of weeks ago, which was to cut our budget below level service. I'm thrilled that the Finance Committee went back and took another look and was able to change that number, because that little bit has really enabled us to keep an ad, and that's what we should be doing. So I am very happy that they heard our discussion that night and were able to make the recommendation of keeping us at level service for next year, because that's going to be a huge difference for us.
All right, so we have a motion to
I have one more comment
bring it up next.
on this.
Go ahead, Mike.
I think very important to point out that this adjustment to our proposed budget reflects an increase in funding of over $600,000. Okay. I've analyzed what we originally produced and called a level service budget. It's my opinion that we're well above being able to provide the same services. As we look through that level service budget, I just think it's very important that we not talk that we're cutting anything here. We're producing a budget that has $600,000. It's the largest increase the Westport Community Schools have seen in the 6 years that I've been analyzing budgets for the schools.
Yes.
So,
Just to be clear, yes.
I just want to make it clear that this is...
We are cutting from our original proposed budget. So the motion on the table to accept the recommendations totaling $82,000. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Thank you.
She didn't hear.
I'm sorry.
Did everybody agree, or?
Yes, 5-0.
Yes, but,
Everybody?
yes.
Poor Karen can't see what's going on.
And Michael, I know we just voted, but I think somebody made a motion. Do you guys want to just say something about this budget subcommittee? You guys want to keep moving on the action agenda, or?
Sure.
Yeah, let's do school choice.
School choice every year, the school committee takes a vote as to whether opening up either the schools as a whole for school choice, usually by identifying which grade levels they would have room to put more students in, perhaps from other districts. The state sets a reimbursement amount for every student that comes from other districts to ours. We had seen some benefit of that in the past, yet at the same time, in other years, we saw that the students that we received from school choice, some of them had some very extensive set of needs that basically were not balanced out by the amount of money that we took in. I've also talked to the principals one by one, and they each said that at this point in time they do not feel like they have room in any of their grade levels where they would feel comfortable committing to putting in additional students from other districts that then would remain with us until their graduation, or potentially till they graduate. So the recommendation from the principals is not to open school choice, and that would have to be by vote of the school committee to basically say no to school choice in our individual schools. If you want more information, we still have one more school committee meeting on the 22nd, but that vote must be taken before June 1st.
Question, Tom?
Go ahead. Question?
I was wondering on school choice, is it an option to open one particular school to school choice or the entire system?
You could do it by school, you could do it by system. What you must do is identify where and how many, and usually at that point you turn over control of the system to a lottery. So if you have 15 people, you announce it that you're part of the school choice program. For grade 3, we have 3 openings. You could have one person apply, you could have 3. There'd be no problem, they would come in. If you have 10, then you would probably have a lottery system.
So yes, we can open it up by school. I know at the high school we still have within our policy book academies within the high school. I don't think we've changed that out of our policy book. Can we open up one academy?
You would have to do it by grade. In the issue that students are classified by grade level first, so you would have to say in grade 10, I have room for 3 students, 10 students, 15 students, and you have to designate how many. And once you take them in grade 10, they could come in back at 11, 12, or until they graduate, whenever that is.
Michelle?
I'd like to make a motion that we do not allow school choice.
Second.
Any discussion on the motion?
Yeah, I would like to take a week to look into more information, till the next meeting, to consider. We have seen over the past 2 years a reduction in enrollment at the high school. This may be an option to bring some high school students in that have particular interests. I think we might want to have some more feedback on the benefits of and in particular, the benefit of opening up school choice by the high school only, and whether or not that option may address some of the concerns that the high school administrator has.
Melissa?
If I may, through the chair, one of my concerns with doing that is we're not sure what we're going to be doing with our middle school and our schools. And I think at this point, we couldn't entertain that in my mind because we don't know what the future's going to bring. So that's why I don't think we'd be able to do that at this point.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor to not allow school choice. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Said I.
Five.
Five. Okay, thank you. Let's do the approval of the field trip at the West. We have a field trip going to the aquarium, the Mystic Aquarium.
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Michelle, Michael.
Michael, second. And I've been on it. It's a great trip. Okay, all in favor? Aye.
Abstain. It's my son's class.
Oh, I guess it's my son's class too.
He's in
Which
second grade?
Oh,
No, second
never
grade.
mind.
It's second grade. The only
Yeah,
one we-
second grade.
He's not in second
My
grade.
son's in second grade.
Yes, he is.
No.
You can vote on the trip. Okay.
It's just to let them go out of state.
It's just, yes. The reason we're voting is because they're going out of state. And maybe even coming back. Okay, let's, you guys want to jump back to the superintendent's goal update and mid-cycle evaluation. All right, so everyone's had a chance to go over the piles of information that was supplied, the evidence to Dr. Colley's goals. And we agreed at our last meeting that we'd be using this mid-cycle formative assessment report as our mid-cycle tool.
Make actually, I got to.
So I'll open it up to discussion on Dr. Colley's report or his evidence. Anybody want to? Michael?
Can I ask a question? Karen, do you have an extra copy of the,
Yeah, I did have it.
because it's sideways on mine, the rubric?
Get to?
No, I just wanted to point out, as you indicated, if this is not a form that we approved last week.
Yeah.
This
'Cause
form
it's
was sent to
sideways.
us
I got it. I can see it, but it was
this
sideways.
last meeting.
It was in that packet. We saw this form last week.
Last meeting.
Does everybody have one?
Karen handed them out.
Yeah, so, Karen handed out everyone a copy. So, does anybody want to comment on any of the evidence? Melissa?
So I took the binder home and read through it, and some of my comments Now, this is new for me too, so, you know, apologize if it's, but one of the things that I found in trying to, you know, I went through every single standard of the rubric. You know, from the Mass Guide for Superintendent Evaluation, literally going through, you know, starting at indicator 1A, and then mapping back to the evidence. And at times it was difficult to see how the evidence was pointing out the specific standard, where if I felt if I would have had a narrative that said, you know, 1A standard, the first one is ensures that all instructional staff design effective and rigorous standards, and then standards-based unit designs, it talks about what proficient is. And I found that there was a number of emails that were used multiple times, a number of agendas, a number of minutes that were used multiple times throughout all of the standards. So trying to figure out what your thought process was in drawing that back to that specific standard was kind of difficult to do, because you know, you may have had a reason for doing it, and I'm trying to guess why you were saying that this specific agenda meeting met this specific standard, where if it would have been, did you want to? Okay, where if it would have just been explained, I think it would have just helped me to be able to say, oh, okay, that's what he's thinking. You know, I don't know if anybody else had that kind of thought.
When I started collecting the evidence, one of the things I did is there are times where we have agendas, for example, my staff, including the principals, the administrators at central office, we meet every other week. And sometimes that agenda carries many different topics within it. And it's basically my chance to find out from them where are they at with some of these goals that both apply to me, to the district, to them as building principals or district level administrators. But at the same time, for us to take a look at where we are. So for example, when we're discussing curriculum, one of the things we sometimes do is we have meetings where we go, okay, we need to plan how many of these units we're going to create this year. We're going to develop a goal of how many units we're going to create. What kind of units? Are we going to take the ones we used to have and update them to the new Common Core? Or are we going to create new ones? Who's going to create them? And then different times during the year, we go back and we check. So what you have in terms of the evidence is, for example, from each of the schools, one of the administrative meetings was bring back to us how many units you've created, how many people were involved in that, when did you meet, which departments, how many they actually completed, how many are still to be completed. So that may be one part of the meeting. The next part of the meeting may be, all right, how are we reaching out to the parents? How are we doing with our school councils in terms of preparation towards the budget? So that same agenda, part of what I was trying to do is not overburden you with the, basically every 2 weeks times however many meetings in a month we've had every 2 weeks. So you would have ended up with 15 different agendas, many of them looking similarly, because in many cases we're touching on that same topic again and again. It's just keeping track. How far have we gone? How much further do we need to go? So I figured one sample would be good enough for that and some of the other topics we talked in there. Sometimes you may get 2 agendas built into the evidence, because there may be a topic we didn't discuss in that agenda. We discussed it in another meeting. A lot of the work that I do, I don't do it directly. I work through other people. So it's in those meetings that a lot of the work gets done, or gets basically, they get marching orders, and then we come back and check how far we've got. We redirect and change direction and go back at it again. So the idea behind this process is not to get every piece of evidence, but samples. So I was trying to get samples that would cover more than one shot, so that this wouldn't be twice as thick as it is. My other I guess the other thing I would hope, and again, this is new for us as well. We've never done it this way. And I think the principals and the administrators would tell you it's happening to them as well. How much evidence is enough evidence? How much evidence is not enough? And one of the things that I would encourage all of you is if you, because again, we'll do this in the fall again, when we do this, if you find there's evidence in here that you don't know how it applies, it'd be just so easy to go through it and say, explain to me what the instructional plan for the high school means. How does that apply to A1A? And I could just go through the evidence and say, this is why it's here, this is how it relates. Here's how I met with the principals, here's what we did.
Yeah, the one thing that would have been helpful to me is, because I know that we spent a painstaking amount of time going through the rubric and picking select ones. I don't remember what we picked. There was too many of them, and to have at least that grid of what it was that we had focused on in Standard 1, Standard 2, Standard 3, and Standard 4, that would have been helpful. Because we didn't pick all of these
No,
things.
we're
There's like
trying to remember
39
them.
of them, and I know we didn't pick them all.
Does anybody remember how many we
I thought
picked?
Michael, at that meeting, didn't he motion to accept all of the standards as is? No? Okay, I thought he did.
Yeah, that's a good point, Kelly. And Michael?
I think we picked like 25 or something.
Yeah, I don't even think we went that high.
Mike?
Yeah,
Yeah, she's done.
Okay. Yeah, there was an overwhelming amount of information provided as evidence, and it was very difficult to understand the connection between the selected evaluation rubric that was not included and the evidence. So I went a little further, and I have provided to the chairperson the guide for superintendent evaluations. I think that, number one, evaluating the superintendent under the Massachusetts Educator Evaluation System is a very helpful guide. It works a little different than administrator or teacher evaluations. I do choose to do my research on my own based on what was presented to me. So I would strongly urge going forward that succinct information that is easily understood is very important. I think it's unfair and unreasonable to expect that 5 individual members, because as I've looked through the state guidelines, nowhere does it suggest that then the school committee should come up and meet independently with the superintendent to review the evidence. I think, in fact, it's steering clear of that, suggesting against it. There's many other steps in this publication, which I don't know if it was shared with all the school committee members. It wasn't on the agenda, so I just sent it to the chairperson. My research into this came about because I had been handed over the past month hundreds of pages of forms and possible this, and besides this, that has to do with this new evaluation system. This is what the state guidelines are. If we choose to follow this, we choose not to because there's the cycles which we've not followed, and so I just again urge as we're filling this out that you might want to pull up and use this guideline, including the section they say making it easier or making it harder. I think this is developed into a very, very difficult process, and would urge that it's not a requirement. And I think we need to know what our the standards we selected. And so I would urge, if we go through this process tonight, we reserve some time to open up discussion on the option of revising the goals that we currently have listed.
Dr. Colley, on that note, you've also supplied a list of your revised goals, correct? Or?
Yes. Wasn't so much revised goals, it was basically how far we've gotten in those goals. Just like I said, I'm taking the feedback that you want more explanation as to the evidence or why was it introduced, why is it significant and included. And I apologize if that wasn't evident. I do, again, I'm trying to go along the same lines as I know the principals and the other administrators have gone, which is to actually meet with the people they are supervising. So that's why I had put this in the office and was hoping that people would ask if they had any questions. But if that's not the way you want to go, I'll certainly at the next round provide more explanation as to why each piece of evidence is in here. And perhaps if I thought at one point in time there was a vote about making sure that all the standards were covered or all the descriptions were covered, but I may be wrong on that. So perhaps it will be a lot less than this for the next round. So it'll make it easier that way. Be more than happy to do that, rather than expect people to come in and meet with me and ask questions.
Was there a discussion about how you were going to present the evidence that within the committee? Because I wonder if that happens, then maybe we can figure that out. So, is it possible to have some sort of brief narrative about it, so that, because even copying all that,
It's a lot of work.
It's a lot of work for you to do too. And I go through and see that the evidence that you provide for different things, and I think, I don't know what the best, most efficient way, and if we talk about it as a committee, how we'd like to see it, then, maybe that would be helpful to communicate it.
I think part of the evidence piece is in the event that there's a disagreement, that you have some factual, concrete things that you can look to.
Sure.
As a lawyer, that's what you do. You build the case so that if there's an agreement, I can show, well, I did these 10 things that address this issue, and I did these 8 things that address this issue. So, you're saying I haven't done anything, but here is the proof that I did do it. So it's easier to not have those disputes because you have the evidence. The narratives are helpful. The other problem that I'm having is that, at least my memory is that we spent a long time winnowing this down, and there's a lot of overlap on some of these things. So I can understand the putting something in 5 or 6 different sections, because there's all this cross stuff going on. So that's probably why there's some of, at least my belief as to why there's some of the repetition. This is a lot of work, and in my opinion, you have to have the pieces of actual paper. Asking to create a narrative on top of that, to me, is more work. I would prefer to go in and talk and get the assessment myself with regard to, whatever my questions are. And that's what I as a supervisor do when I have somebody that I'm supervising. If I have questions or issues, I bring them in. I don't say, write me a report. I talk to them. And I say, I'm seeing this, I'm seeing that. Why is this? Why is that? And that becomes the back and forth of evaluating.
Is the committee comfortable moving forward today with this, or?
I got one question based on what you asked, because you haven't got an answer yet. The revised goals, superintendent. This is not dated, but this is not a suggestion for revising goals. This is the goals, correct? Because you asked if there were some new goals. Maybe I wasn't reading it correctly.
When I came to you way back, I believe it was like November, there were like 9 goals. we had several meetings. I think the last one was in December. And those goals were pared down to these 6. So literally, I just went back to that school committee meeting and pulled these out.
So does that,
Yeah, I mean,
Tony asked
these
if you
are
had
the
new
same goals.
These are the same goals that we agreed to in like December, I think it was.
So I would suggest we start by reading the whole goal, and then, Tony, you asked if anyone wanted to go forward.
Well, I mean, if,
The goals are.
I mean, the goals are here, you guys have them in front of you. Do you want to make comments on your
Yes,
individual
I'd like to.
evaluations that would be entered into the aggregate, the record?
No, I think that this goal sheet is the first step, rather than referring it throughout as goal 1. It was in the multiple pages, but we've had a couple of comments about the lack of understanding it. You thought they were newly recommended goals. Some of us couldn't find the goals. Yes, they were approved in December. These are the goals that were approved by the 3 people in attendance. What I'm asking is, do we identify the goals or just call it goal 1 as we continue to? And I'm asking
I'm not
the
sure you're
chairperson.
asking me, Mike.
I'm asking, can I read goal 1?
If you want to, sure,
Okay.
my guess.
If we're starting, I'm saying that.
You want to go first, Michael?
No, I'm suggesting as part of this form, it says goal 1.
I'll read goal 1.
I think we should identify it.
I'll read goal 1 into the record. Work with MASBO to learn better ways of developing budget recommendations to the school committee by February 15th, 2013, that take into account the input of the school council, staff, student data, and performance. All right, so in goal 1, does anybody have any comments on goal 1? Carolyn?
I think the executive summary that was done with regard to the budget was very helpful. It was useful in not just for me as a school committee person, but going to the finance committee meetings, being able to discuss the budget, showing the trends. It was a very, very useful piece of information that we didn't have last year, and I'm very happy that was developed, and we should continue and build on that.
Michael?
Yes, I read the goal as saying that it's going to be working with MASPO to accomplish this. So rather than rating the actual accomplishment, I looked through the data that was provided. I didn't see much evidence of working with MASPO. So that was my input on that goal. I have recently seen that, and I don't know the dates that we're covering here, because that's also not clear what the date of this is. I know we revised some dates. What dates are being covered? And based on that, I'd ask Dr. Colley if there's any evidence that I missed on the, or is that appropriate to share between ourselves?
Absolutely.
Or, you know, what dates we worked with MASPO?
The MASPO work actually began last summer at the MASC Superintendent's Conference. MASPO came in and did a whole presentation on budget development. One of them was creating executive summaries. I think at one point in time in the fall, I brought in a couple of samples and said that I would be working with creating something similar for Westport. Unfortunately, a lot of the work that I did was basically calling people like at Springfield or meeting them when we had our MASPO bi-monthly meetings and saying, hey, how did you get this graph, or why did you put this in here, and how did people relate to that? So a lot of it was simply conversations with colleagues at other districts. Munson and Springfield are basically the two that had very good ones that they presented at that first conference as kind of exemplars. So I basically took theirs, and then as I went through them and tried not quite mimic them, because Springfield has like 15 people in their payroll just to do budgets. But at least I try to copy those pieces that I thought would be useful for us. So in that sense, basically it was the work with just other colleagues and taking their documents that they presented at a workshop and trying to replicate them or get something similar that would be useful for us.
Does anybody else have a question on the first goal?
I just have a comment
Michelle?
because it can't get read into the aggregate unless we state it.
You
So,
stated, yeah.
does Melissa know that?
Melissa, do you have, if you want your comments put into the aggregate, you need to say them in public.
You have to
So
say
if you have
it.
something on your own,
On your individual form, you need to say them in public. If you want them,
If you want it in the, or if you want it in the main document.
I just have to, because I know we started to now look at the goals. Are we going to go back and look at the standards after? Is that what's going on? Is that why we skipped the
yeah, well,
goals?
yes.
Is that, okay. So
I just wanted to say that I think that the new, the executive summary document that we have been able to present to the different committees and that were presented to us as well is developing nicely. I think it, the developing document has been helpful to the other committees in understanding the needs and the whys of the schools, and I think that's been very important for some of what we have seen this year with them going, you know what, now we understand why the schools need what they need, and I think the lack of that clear explanation has, in the past, has hindered them from understanding, and I think now that it's developing, they are starting to understand the whys of what we're asking for, and also looking at other districts in the area and comparing and understanding a little better. So I do think it's developing nicely. I think it still has, some tweaking, and I think it's a bit of a living document, but I do think it's developing nicely.
Karen, I would add also the executive's budget summary was well done.
Mike?
Again, I just, based on the school committee policy of reading into the record, I'll repeat my concern of after that there was no evidence provided of working with MASPO.
Anyone else? Okay. Goal 2, use the Educator Evaluation Labor Management Committee to reach consensus between labor and management issues raised by both administrators and staff regarding the implementation of the Educator Evaluation System. Dr. Carl, you want to just give us a very brief explanation of what that all means?
Yeah, we've been meeting at least once a month with the basically a cross-section of staff from each of the buildings that chose to be on the Labor Management Committee. I did include one area that basically I usually take my notes and provide them back to the Labor Management Committee so we know kind of the areas that we covered in the previous meeting. I'll give you an example. This past, I want to say Thursday was the last one. And one of the areas that was still to be discussed was the use of video as part of an evaluation system. And we have administrators in that meeting, Dr. Dargan, myself, and anywhere between 2 or all 4 of the principals come to those. And we agreed that for now, the use of video would be more on the part of the staff in order to basically provide evidence of what they have and have not done in their classroom. So if a principal goes in and says, I don't see any evidence of you giving the students enough time to answer questions, and the staff person wants to dispute that claim that an administrator may have on a one-time visit or a couple of visits, the educator could conceivably set up a camera in the back, videotape themselves, and provide that to the administrator as evidence. So those are the kind of things that we're trying to work through. We're still discussing the issue of using supervisors that may be in part in the union for some of the time and working as administrators part of the time. That we still haven't agreed upon. But one of I believe the piece of evidence that I introduced was my recollection or my notes on the meeting were after doing the mid-year evaluations, these formative, like you're doing with me, that the principals had done with the teachers, that we basically asked the teachers and asked the principals, is there anything that's not working with these formative evaluations, things that people have concerns, and there wasn't a peep from either side of the table. And, you know, we asked again at the last meeting, and the only thing that's coming back now, which is kind of interesting, is that people are afraid, or administrators and some of the staff are afraid that people will focus so much on providing all this evidence, as you guys have pointed out that this is quite a bit, rather than spending a lot of time creating good lessons and teaching, and, you know, how much is enough evidence. I had a conversation with at least one of the principals as to whether now that they're asking for these portfolios that people have created to come back, have people taken pieces out and made them more streamlined, or are they just adding more stuff? That I wanted to make sure principals paid attention to that between now and the end of the year. So I'll let you know the answer to that one, but we're still meeting.
Does anyone have any comments on goal number 2? Melissa?
If I could, for goal number 2, it says under observations, it says supervisors have a concern, they need to put it in a narrative, identify the standards of concern applies to, explain the evidence showing the concern, and put it in suggestions for improvement. And I wanted to read that because as I'm thinking about understanding the evidence, it seems like these are some observations that were that the teachers are using, and I'm just thinking that might be helpful in this process as we begin to go through the standards. We're saying there's a narrative, identify the standard it applies to, explain the evidence showing the concern. So anyways, I'm just trying to draw that might be helpful. I don't know how, and maybe because I'm new and haven't seen it, but I'm not, I feel like I'm not able to see that goal being, met by the evidence that's provided. So I'm not sure. I don't know if others can offer feedback as well, so that maybe can be helpful.
Anyone else? Michael?
Yes, my comment is very little information provided specific to this goal.
All right, let's move on. Number 3. Ensure that on average, 80% of the students will pass their mid-year course assessments in grades 9 through 12, and 90% will pass their final course summative assessments.
Was this the original?
Was what we ended up with.
Okay, I thought it was, but
that's why I asked before.
Well, I thought it was, but it says revised. I wanted to make sure that this wasn't. I didn't think it was. But
So it is, Dr. Colley, that is the numbers that we had set. Okay.
I did put in the information in the explanation of goals 3, basically, that it was in particularly difficult at the high school, where some courses have a mid-year assessment, some don't. Some of them are quarter courses, so the end of the course assessment is your final, almost your half your grade, and pretty much all-encompassing. So trying to, and this is one of the things we discovered while we do this work, is that our data management system may not be the easiest one to work with in order to pull this information out, because I literally had to go and print pretty much every student's report cards at both the middle school and the high school in order to get through these couple of goals in order to figure out where the students were at or how they're progressing towards this goal. I can tell you that if you take a look at the high school, in that chart that I provided as to the information I was able to pull out, in fact, by the time you get to this time of the year, they're already into the third quarter. So the information you have here includes third quarter data. So for many students, this may include 3 courses. It may include those courses that are quarter 1, quarter 2, or the whole first semester. And in some cases, I even had enough data to cover the third quarter courses. So you may be looking at one student having already taken 4 courses times, I believe it's like 4 or 5 slots where they can fit 4 slots? 4 slots per semester, so, or per quarter actually. So in looking at that, the average number of students passing their courses in 9th grade on ELA was 88, and math was 78 in 9th grade. If you move through the grade levels, you see that that continues to creep up till you get to almost 99% of students in 12th grade pass their courses in ELA, and about 90% in math. So I would consider that goal is well progressing well into those numbers. The math at the 9th grade may be the only place where you have a little bit of a question mark.
Do these numbers ensure that the students are actually meeting the goal?
What do you mean?
Unless I'm reading the goal wrong.
80% by mid-year.
Mid-course, are we talking, and then final course, so we're talking by the midterm, we're not talking about like a midterm exam, we're talking about, I just want to make sure we're clear.
Actually, I went all the way to quarter 3. So I went a little beyond the mid-course. Again, because at the high school you do have those quarter courses, so it'd be hard for any one student figure out what their mid-year is, because they could take 3 courses times 4 per quarter.
Michael first, and then Melissa.
I just want to make sure I'm at the right page.
Graph, you want to be at the graph? Go ahead,
The
Melissa.
revised goal page. Oh. Again, the C above, is that the narrative? The narrative? When you said C above, I didn't know what you were telling us. Am I on the right one?
It's the chart. He's referring to the chart, right?
See above is the little report.
Was
at
it
the
the
beginning.
above? The chart or the?
No, the little report
Narrative.
at the beginning, the narrative.
It's the narrative at the beginning.
What did he say?
The narrative.
Oh, okay.
Got a question? Melissa?
Well, I'm not sure now if it's moved in, I didn't get the C above, so now I'm not sure if my question's answered, but my thoughts were on this one is it would have been nice to know what were the mid-cost assessments that were utilized in some sort of akin narrative, but when I mean narrative, I don't mean a 5-page report, but just a couple of sentences, and then some sort of discussion in regards to why they were or weren't there. I think, these are some seems to be some really good percentages, and, saying, just having some reasonings behind them versus just having a chart with numbers, I think would have been helpful in assessing it and evaluating.
Any other comments?
No, I just want to, I do kind of want to piggyback off of what she said, because I think Melissa is actually saying the same thing that I was saying. You're taking this as a mid-course assessment, meaning like a midterm exam, correct?
I don't know.
Or
what it
something
is.
along
Yes.
those lines.
What is it?
That's what I'm taking it as. And so that's where my question, and then I think
You-
you answered in a different direction.
If you see the paragraph on that first page, that's the C above. We're basically, I'm suggesting that goal 3 makes more sense if you look at it as the number of courses that students have passed versus whether they pass the midterm or the final from
Okay.
each course, because many of the courses do not have midterms as such. They may have like 4 tests in a quarter and end up with just the final grade based on those 4 tests, or 3 tests and a final, but no midterm.
That's why I was confused, because the goal didn't match what you were giving us.
And
And that's why I didn't understand. I thought, did the goal change and you gave us different stuff? That's why I was confused. And you just sort of validated, Melissa, what I was thinking. I thought maybe I was missing something.
no, you
Okay.
you got it right. And this is why you have this mid-year formative evaluation or discussion or feedback. Is you take a look at where the goals were that you planned out in September, and as the year goes through, you learn things, and sometimes the goal needs to change. And I'm not suggesting that we make the goal, that we get rid of the goal. I'm saying that the information that we collect may be more important to show our students passing their courses and what's their passing rate versus focusing on mid-year assessments or mid-course assessments at the high school. I think it's more important since they have some, a very short period of time, either in quarter courses or semester courses, trying to pinpoint that mid-course or midterm, if you will. I think it's more important to be able to look at passing rates per course, which is why I wanted to suggest that that goal be changed to students will be passing half their courses or their courses at mid-year by 80%, 90% by the end of the year. It's kind of telling the kids, if you fail a couple of your courses in the mid-year, let's put more attention so that by the end of the year you buckle down and you pass your courses.
No, I understand that, and I actually, I don't disagree with that. My only suggestion to that would be to tweak it a little bit more and even tie down what we are talking about when we talk about what passing is. And passing to do one thing might be one thing, but passing what we're looking for might be something different. Are we looking for a certain percentage to be passing above a 70, or are we looking at 60? What are we looking for? So, and I think that would be an important thing to look at when we look at goals.
And, thanks, Michelle. And I remember what the M was in SMART, but could you just quickly, the SMART goals,
They're going to be strategic and specific, measurable, going to be actionable or attainable, realistic and rigorous, and timely.
Thank you. So that's, I guess, the reason I had Ann remind us of that, because I guess next year we'll know better how to tweak these goals to make them more easily understood and easily measured, and
Right, but you could have,
Tony, if I could,
absolutely.
I'd like to stay specifically to the evaluation we have in front of
We are,
us.
we are.
I made a suggestion at the beginning that we also visit revising the goals, and what we're doing here is combining that discussion with each step. I think we ought to stick with the goals. So my comment on this goal is, A, the goal itself does not refer at all to a calendar. Okay, so the suggestion that
Through the chair.
I'm speaking to you. Listen. So the suggestion is that pass their mid-course assessments. Okay, it doesn't mean middle of the calendar year, so I'm still,
We're going to make them SMART goals next year.
no, I'm struggling with two explanations on not having attained this goal. One is that the calendar, and we are referencing the length of the year versus the course schedule. And secondly, in the narrative, I just want to again get back to the paragraph that I also am struggling with, and it's primarily in relation to this goal, as identified, that the state delays. Because of the state delays and complications, we have not moved ahead in a consistent development of midterm and end-of-course assessments at the middle school and the high school. And then it goes on. We've had a very thorough explanation here tonight and through this process that this is, the evaluation and the assessment tools are a 3-year strategy that the state's putting forward. In no way do I see that the goal is tied to reaching a decision at the state level. And so that's where my struggle was. Therefore, I will read for the record that
We're on number 3, Michael, right?
number 3, correct.
Comments on 3, okay.
The goal 3, reasoning for not meeting this goal are not understood.
I understand the reasoning behind not meeting the goal. We don't have the computer systems and the ability to readily upload the data so that we can make these evaluations because the state hasn't put them in place. We're waiting. It's the chicken and the egg thing. And so I understand the reasoning behind. So in order to proceed, we're going to have to do a little bit of tweaking until the systems that need to be put in place get in place, and at that point, this will be a much easier task. So I have no issue with understanding.
Melissa?
So, to clarify, how are we evaluating number 3? Are we evaluating it based on we don't have a system, or are we evaluating it based on the information we've received? So that's the first question. The second question is I almost feel as though I need more information because I don't want to rate off target when I feel like if I got that information, it would be a different. So I don't know, is it at the end of this discussion, are we going to hand this in, or are we going to be able to?
Tony? Again, this is not an evaluation per se.
Okay.
This is a mid-year formative evaluation, meaning this is a chance that the school committee has and for the superintendent to provide you with some information of what we have discovered over the course of the last 6 months or 4.5 months since Christmas, which is basically when these goals got put together. And again, I know that Mr. Sullivan doesn't like me to reference what the state said, but you have to remember, a year or more
That's
ago.
not correct. I don't agree with it.
Okay.
So please don't categorize a comment I made. I don't mind.
Dr. Colley has the floor. Through the chair, Dr. Colley.
Okay. The reason why I made the comment about the state is because over a year ago, the state indicated that by the end of this year, we needed to have our district-determined measures in place, operational, and working. The state said that they would provide us with guidance, with models, and with training in order to complete that task. So when we were planning these goals last summer as part of the administrative team retreat, we came up with some of these goals that would start with the superintendent or the district as a whole, down to the building, down to the individual educators. One of those was to create midterms and finals and make sure they were there for high school and middle school courses. The problem was that the staff was waiting for us to tell them, here's what the state is suggesting we do, or the information that the state is providing, in order for them to then, during staff development time or while they're creating their units, that they would go and create their own assessments, whether it be midterms or finals. Since we had nothing to give to them, they couldn't spend that time during their staff development or on their own creating these midterms and finals, which left me having to look at whatever data was available, which in some cases was final exam data, but in many cases, many staff do not have midterm data, in particular in those quarter level courses. So again, they didn't create them because we didn't give them guidance, because we expected the state to give us guidance, which they're just now beginning to give us. That's why I said number 4, we didn't push it with the staff because we'd had nothing to give them. And number 3, I again couldn't ask them to have midterms if they hadn't created midterms. So I used the data that was available. And again, it's that idea of being strategic. What information would be interesting to get out of the data from the high school, which to me was how many students are not passing their courses, so we know how many students or percentage of students may end up in summer school or needing credit recovery or needing some kind of remediation so that they can graduate on time. That was the reason why I'm suggesting that that goal be changed and that number 4 cannot be accomplished until we get more information from the state, and perhaps we can work on that over the summer.
All right, so that explains 3 and obviously explains 4.
Well, I asked we finish 3 first.
What do you want to say?
I want to add my comment to the record.
Didn't you already?
Not my comment for the record.
Go ahead.
We seem to be going off the suggested guide
Add
of
your
having
comment so we can
dialogue
move on.
here. My comment is Dr. Colley is responsible for selecting the method of assessing student performance. Period.
Okay, does anyone?
This is not tied
anyone-
to anything to do with the state assessment.
Sure, Melissa.
Based
This
on-
is number 3?
Number 3.
Okay.
Based on state delay in system off target, data provider would have liked to see next steps to identifying how to close the gaps that were addressed.
Okay. All right, so 4, does anyone have anything they want to add to the record on 4? Go ahead, Mike.
You want me to start? What we're trying to do is read the goal. So should I?
I'll read the goal. Provide support to the middle school administration to assist staff in creating common assessments for midterm and final course summative assessments before September 2013.
Want to add your comment to the record?
Got something to add to
Yeah.
that?
Perhaps we need clarification because common assessments are capitalized here, okay? It makes no sense to have a goal for something that does not exist. So if this is do we have assessment tools? What did we do last year? Until we start our new year, our new program of assessing, we have ways to assess. So I don't know if common assessments is referring to replacing, or is this tied to common assessments based on state input?
Dr. Cully, you
We
want to
should
answer
always
that?
have assessment tools.
In terms of common assessments, the high school have created assessments that they're calling common assessments. That's why I capitalized that. I was envisioning that the middle school will do the same. They have some, what I would consider not capitalized common assessments, which are assessments stemming from units of study that they have made, but they're not cumulative. We have moved towards more exploring how to create more cumulative assessments. So if you have 3 units in the fall, then hopefully in the middle of the year you pull some pieces of those assessments from each of those units to create a midterm that's cumulative, and perhaps as you do 2-3 more units in the spring, by the time you get to the end of the year, you create some common assessments that would cover all 4, 5, 6 units that you have in the whole year, say for example in science. Again, we have not put a lot of emphasis on that, although I know the middle school has done some work in this during staff development because they have been working on their units of study and making sure they're updated, looking back at the Common Core and the changes there. However, my emphasis in order to provide support to the middle school was going to be, once we know what the state expects out of district-determined measures, if we are going to use our midterms and our finals, I need to make sure that I direct the middle school principal and staff and support how to do those midterms and finals so that they can be approved as district-determined measures, including if you create a final, you have to show how it's reliable across 4 or 5 people doing that same final, as to is it valid, does it reflect what you taught, does it reflect what the Common Core requires, and that the people actually spend some time creating manuals as to how to operate this assessment that you've now created, because these are the things the state's now telling us that they are going to require, and we just found out 2 weeks ago. So at this point, that's why I'm saying I have not pushed that goal into the middle school, because we're just now finding out what the state is going to expect of us.
Melissa? Oh, I'm sorry. Michelle first.
Me. Correct me if I just want to make sure I understand this before my comment. Common assessment is so that when we talk common assessment, we're talking every 5th grade science teacher is going to use the same test for midterm, same test for final, so that when you get that grade at the end of the year, you know that this 80 is equal to this 80, or vice versa. With that said, one school over the other one definitely has a bigger issue with this. I certainly hear a lot of talk coming out of one school saying, well, my kid's getting all these hundreds and another kid in the same type of class is only getting 80s, and what's going on? I understand that we're waiting on the state, and I get that, but at the same time, how do we balance, and I guess this would be my criticism, how do we balance the needs of our students for making sure that that 90 for one child in one class who may be working really hard, the other kid's getting a 99 and sailing through the class and having very different work, because I know that's happening. We need to balance that. And I understand we're waiting for the state, but at the same time, I think we need to be pushing something so that we are developing those common assessments so that we don't have this going on.
In fact, that's one of the specific pieces that the state is saying you now must prove, if you're going to use that final as a district determined measure, or any kind of assessment, as a district determined measure, you must prove to the state that whether you give it in this classroom or that classroom, it is measuring the same thing. That's part of the reliability study. And that it actually reflects what's expected at that grade, and that it reflects what you actually taught. That's the validity side of it. And you got to go one step further and put it in writing. How did you determine that? So it may be that a third teacher actually gives the test and grades them. I see some of that as you look at year to year.
For writing, especially.
For reading, sometimes math. This teacher's an easy grader, if you've heard that. This would hopefully prevent that from happening as you look at that chart, because that's why I felt that chart was important. You look at some of the scores in there and you go, how do they go from 3rd grade, everybody passing, to 4th grade, not everybody passing, and then back up to 5th grade and everybody passes again. And by the time you end up in 8th grade, everybody passes, but they come to 9th grade, and now not everybody's passing again. So those discrepancies is what the state wants you to focus on, and what we're going to be working on over the summer. One, to identify how we're going to prevent those discrepancies from happening, so that people can say, I'm comfortable with the grades that you're giving, that they're true, that they're not just inflated because you don't want to make Johnny feel bad, or the parents get upset because Johnny got a B instead of an A.
I understand that, but I guess my criticism, if I'm going to find one with this, is that I understand what you're saying. We need to wait for the state. They're telling us what we need to do, and I'm assuming we don't want to, do the work and then have to rework it again. And I get that, but at the same time, we have to get these things in place for the kids. So how do we balance waiting for the state and still getting a move on some of these things while we're waiting, so that we're trying to move forward?
Good point.
That's all.
Was this, Edwin, was this known when the school was originally developed, or did this come after?
Was
That
what?
the whole-
No.
The training that you're talking about for the Edward Teaching and Learning?
The state promised it, but we only got wind of it. I think the first one was in February. There was another one in March, and there was just now one in April. And each one, the requirements to create those assessments keeps growing. In fact, one of the issues that we're having, which may get to the point of what you're bringing up, Michelle, is that perhaps we load up on tests that are not made by us, because in some cases those tests may be having some reliability and validity that's tested outside of our staff, although there's still the issue of how do they get presented to the students and administered. So that might be part of it. I would hate to go completely in that route, and I know we can't do that in every area. So we're going to have to find a balance and perhaps teach our staff to be a little bit more conscientious. And if you see your kids all passing with flying colors and the kids next door getting A's and B's and some C's, you may want to try to figure out and talk with your colleague, if you're teaching the same thing, how do we get it to look the same, or is it truly that I just ended up with the best of the best?
Dr. Colley, but we have been working on units of study, and we've been doing that as a district. Maybe the state wants you to do it another way, more formal way, but we have been doing that. So that disparity in teacher A and teacher B, and all these kids are getting A's and these kids are struggling. We should be tightening that.
And again, that's why I collected this data. When you put it in front of the principals, I'm going to be asking the question, okay, now that you see the data, how do we go back and double check and make sure that we are being reliable with what we're saying our kids are doing?
Last question
It's a very quick, it's a yes or no answer. Have we registered for the May pilot for the ETNL? There's a May pilot that still has openings according to this evidence here. It says May and summer pilots. We have a few spots available in the May pilot. Have we registered for that?
May pilot for which one?
We're discussing that at our next
Because I believe there's still room, but we haven't discussed it. It's on the admin meeting coming up Thursday, I believe.
And the second question?
So what is?
Or I think it's, which one are you referring to?
Well, we're talking about doing assessments, and the goal was to ensure that provide support. I'm just wondering what type of support. It sounds like no support has been provided. You're waiting for these to go through the state system, and so is that?
The first piece of support we're providing is we're participating in all the webinars. And once we do the webinars, so for example, we just did the one about a week and a half ago. Then we meet as administrative staff, put that information back to the principals. We're going to be asking them which of these assessments they want to put through the paces for the state. And that's part of the work we're going to do over the summer. But there may be some that they choose to, will still do those assessments, but there may be others that we choose to use as our district-determined measures that are a lot more reliable and perhaps made by somebody else, so that we don't have to burden them with creating basically our own MCAS for everything.
Ms. Wikipedia?
Thank you. We're actually part of the first cohort. We became members of that cohort in February, where we sent 2 assistant principals as well as a teacher from the high school. There are 20 districts participating in the first cohort. That, I believe, is for subsequent cohorts now. So I believe we're already part of that pilot.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on, please. Goal 5, 80% of students will increase their MCAS scores, their MCAS performance by 5% in ELA and math at the West. Hold on, let me read that again. I'm putting my sublabulus in the wrong. By the MCAS, 80% of students will increase their MCAS performance by 5% in ELA and math at the West, and in math at the middle school.
And again, this is one that, at this point, what I can tell you is the work that they have been doing and the information that I could get from the 2 schools, and it's the reason why I presented with the idea that if you have the information on how they're performing in their classes, my hope is that that performance translates to how they're going to do on the MCAS. Looking at the ELA and the math in grade 4, I'm a little concerned, but if they do as well as they did in their courses in the other grade levels, then perhaps we'll start to see some improvement in ELA and math.
I'm just wondering how this goal got in here, considering the results won't be out till.
We talked about
I think
that.
that's why the summative was moved to September.
Does anyone want to add any comments to that one?
No.
Seeing no hand.
No, I just want to put it, I didn't get to say my comment from the last one because I couldn't ask any.
I'm sorry.
I have one on this one.
Go ahead, Melissa, on your last
So
one.
I'm just going to read
On
the
the
last one. I put joined early as pilot, great start getting on board early.
So that was for number 4,
Yes,
Karen.
4. Oh, what was number 4? Sorry. Joined early as pilot, great start getting on board early.
Michael, comment on number 5?
Is there a suggestion we waive making any comment on this where the goal is not attainable? Or have there been indications that we're going to reach this goal? I guess that I would have expected a comment about similar to what you just said, but I didn't see that in the packet. Through the chair, I was asking everyone, but Dr. Colley indicates he may want to comment on it.
Absolutely. Comment away.
There are some pieces of evidence, some of it which you have seen. In particular, I'll point to the Achieve 3000. We have a lot of students participating, and some of them showing great gains. I figured, but again, we have never had this program at the same time as MCAS, so I do not know how Achieve 3000 would correlate with MCAS. I'd hate to make a leap of judgment in that sense. The same thing with the Go Math program that we have. We have some staff that love it, and the students seem to be doing really well in it. We have other staff that continue to bring up questions as to, at a particular grade level for particular chapters, does it really meet what the Common Core is asking them to do? And you got to remember, the MCAS is now changing to the Common Core standards, so some staff are expressing concern that they don't know if the Go Math will completely or will closely correlate with the MCAS. So to be honest, I don't know. I'm not feeling comfortable making that leap of faith. But those are the tools we have, and I know the students are doing well with it. But at this point, I can't make that judgment.
I appreciate that clarification, and again, the type things that, if this goal remains in place in future years, at midterm, I would hope to see some type evidence that provides the superintendent with substantial evidence that we're making progress. If we have an MCAS help program and we've referred X number of students into the MCAS health program over the past 6 months, that might show some achievement towards that goal. I know the New Bedford Public Schools, for instance, has an after-school MCAS help program. And I don't see that we've visited that as a way to achieve this goal. So I'm just, my comment, I should help Karen to tell her when I'm making a comment, but I'm highlighting Karen.
Okay.
My comment is no evidence on current MCAS progress, student progress.
Tony? I mean, the only way you can really measure this goal is once you have the MCAS results, which is why we moved the final evaluation until we got the results. We had vigorous debate about this goal, and we all recognized that it was an important goal to meet, that we should have it as a goal, but that you cannot really assess it until the kids actually take the test and we get the results. When the results are in, we'll know, did they meet the 5% or did they not? Until then, it's all speculative.
Melissa, just to clear this up a little bit, the MCAS results aren't released to the public until
The end of August.
the end of August.
I mean, end of September, sorry,
September.
September. They come out in August and then we don't get them
So
until
we
September.
don't hear them until they get released to the public. So what we did is we pushed back his final evaluation until after we get the MCAS score, so that we can use that in the evaluation. So that's why that's in here, but
So would we be looking at, I mean, not started, I mean, I don't know how to, I almost want to leave it blank because it's not really.
pretty much gonna leave it blank. I mean, I don't know, do what you want.
Well, okay.
We threw it in there as one of his goals because we want to use it in his final evaluation.
Thank you.
Anything else on this particular item, Mr. Saul?
Yeah, it's more of a point of information. Certainly at the end of the evaluation period, I think all of us will be here for the length of time that provides. We're evaluating based on what was given to us. Okay,
Just the midterm, just a correction, yeah?
So, thank you for clarifying that.
All right, let's move on. Or did we finish? Number 7. Number 6, I'm sorry. 70% of students will end the year reading at level C in K, I in grade 1, M in grade 2, P in grade 3, and S in grade 4. Colin, you want to say anything briefly on that?
Well, taken as a whole, I would say from the data that we got, the students should be able to meet that goal. My biggest concern, and again, because this is a mid-year, let's look at the data and see where we are. My biggest concern is the difference between grade levels as to how many students are performing at the target level. And one of my suggestions would be, whether we do this for next year or maybe even at the end of the year, is to spot check, kind of like what Michelle was talking about in terms of reliability between people rating their own kids, that perhaps we do some switching. You take 3 of my kids, I'll take 3 of your kids, and see if we come up with the same reading level, because I'm finding it really difficult to understand why you would go from 81% in first grade all the way down to 60 for 4th graders.
Carly, what other testing are we doing? We're not doing the Iowas anymore.
we have basically their tests of reading and comprehension. You have the Achieve 3000 for third grade and fourth grade. You have some of the people are still doing the Dibbles testing for the younger grades. We do have the MCAS's historical data from the previous year. Hopefully we'll get it for this, well, we will get it for this year. And we have assessments that the teachers do as they go through their units. So there is a series of assessments that they have, but the one that we're focusing on is reading level. Within a grade level, you would see a range, but by the end of the year, you want to see them reading at least the highest level of that grade level, so when you pass them on to the next teacher, they're not lagging behind, so that hopefully by the time they see that third grade test, they're ready to take it and be able to deal with the comprehension questions and the readability of those passages that they are going to see.
Okay, Michelle, then Caroline.
My comment is not so much for the assessment as much as a comment / question. The difference between first grade 81 and 60 for fourth and math not so big, but could it not be that, first of all, I mean, for the assessments down there, I've seen them, what they're assessing, and it's pretty specific when they are assessing how they read, for example, as far as the number of words they get right. It's pretty specific, so I would think that switching off is less likely to, I'm sure it does, but I'm just saying the margin of error I wouldn't think as great as it might be for, say, a writing prompt or something along those lines. However, I'm wondering the large difference that we might be seeing, these younger grades, we've really tried to nip early at their reading and math capabilities. And I'm wondering, I'm hoping that maybe that's what we're seeing. And we're seeing some of our third and fourth graders trying to play catch up and get to where we want them to be because we didn't maybe focus quite the same as we are for our younger readers and younger kids doing the math. So I'm hoping maybe this is some forward progress that we're seeing here.
I am hoping against.
I'm trying to look at it.
Yes.
I'm trying to think why we might be seeing those crazy numbers because it's kind of a big number. But I have to think we've really focused the last couple of years on what are we doing in third and fourth grade MCAS and why is our ELA and math so poor. So let's focus in these areas and hopefully now we're seeing some improvement in those little ones, K1 and 2.
And again, that's why I'm not suggesting that we go ahead and switch all the kids and have them tested by somebody from the outside.
You pick
but
a sampling.
spot check.
Sure.
That would be the best of all results, is to see that the investment that we did in early childhood interventions is actually beginning to pay off. So more kids are reading on grade level and doing well in their math, and hopefully that will trickle through as those kids move through the school. Maybe all, kind of, it's like a wave coming through. Even so, though, I would love to see the students that are still not performing where we want them to perform catching up. And I think that's a huge challenge. Even if we are doing a great job with the early childhood and that will work its way through the system, I still feel like we can't leave those students behind that perhaps didn't have the staff didn't have the training, didn't have the materials that would have helped those students catch up a little quicker. So we're still going to have to put some effort into those grade levels.
I have a question. This what is it called? RAS kids?
RAS kids.
How many is it by grade? My second grader has it, but
I love RAS kids.
but my first grader doesn't. And I mean, he's on the computer reading like I've never seen him read before.
My first grader does have RAS kids.
It's first and second grade. Then when they go to third and fourth, we're doing more Achieve 3000. The RAS kids programming is more appropriate to those younger grade levels. So yeah, It's
Okay,
one
so
of
my
those
first grader
things.
does have it, he's just not using it.
I don't know, mine does.
Is it piloted? Because mine doesn't use it either.
First grade, I think they do it more in school than they do. We just bought it.
We did.
I'm sorry,
That's okay.
that's why I know what his reading level is.
Talking about goal seven.
I know.
There were some first grade teachers that were piloting it. And then what happened was that they were going to do the training that got snowed out, and finally done. So I think those other first grade classrooms are kind of catching up.
They now have everybody's got the training now, though, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, so let's speak on to goal 6. And
Yeah, I just, if it's my turn. So goal 6, 70% of students will end the year reading at level, and then it references grade 1 through 4. My comment is there's been no evidence provided on current reading levels.
Melissa?
So, well, actually leads to a question then. So I guess when I read the percentages here, those aren't the percentage of students reading at the appropriate reading level?
Yeah, they are.
Okay, so then I'll go back to my comment. So this is my comment that I put for goal 6. So it would be helpful to know how the low percentages were going to be targeted to try to ensure the goal will be able to be met, especially for the lower percentages. And for those grades that are already at the, or exceeding the percentage indicated, what are we doing to ensure they are challenged? Just kind of information that'd be helpful to know, but I mean, it still is good news.
Okay, let's move on,
Point of
please.
information.
Yes, Mr.
What is the date on that graph? I took the presentation to point that, maybe it is, but
Hello?
Yes, I'm sorry.
The
I thought you were
graph is
trying to call
based, I'm sorry, the graph is based on the trimester. If you know, the elementary school is still on trimesters. Here at the high school would have been, and the middle school would have been the third quarter. So I took the information right out of the principal's reports as to how the kids did at the elementary school would have been the second trimester. At the middle school, high school, but in third quarter, the same thing with the MAC.
Okay, all right. At this point, earlier we discussed the standards, and Dr. Colley provided us all 62 or 64 standards, and we had narrowed that list down earlier this year to, I don't remember, maybe 20, 16 or so standards. So I'd like for us, or for you, Dr. Colley, to get that list, send that out to the members, and then maybe we could finish this first page here of the assessment report. And maybe that'll make it a little easier.
Just as a question, do you want me to still, and I'm just talking at the next round for the summative, just so I know how much to collect and archive, do you want me to collect evidence on those other pieces of the rubric, or just the ones?
I mean, I guess you could collect them for your own sake if you wanted to, but I think the ones that the school committee decided on would be the ones those are the ones that we're going to focus on.
We can do that.
So if it pleases the committee, we'll put this off till our next meeting, and of course I encourage the members to sit down with the superintendent if they have specific questions, whether on the evidence or maybe on the whole exercise.
Again.
until
Turn them
next
into
week.
Karen.
Turn them into Karen. So we want to turn in the second page, the, yeah, that's not on email.
Mine did. I put mine on.
Take
The
the
whole
page off.
thing. Why don't you just hand the whole thing in? Okay.
Sure, okay. That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll do that. So if you guys want to just pass the form in and.
Is that yours?
And pass the highlighters forward so we don't get yelled at. All right, guys, we are a few minutes late here. Let's move on to routine matters, approval of minutes of Wednesday, April 24th, 2013. Did I hear a motion?
So moved.
Second? Is there a second?
Second.
Any discussion on the minutes?
I did.
Michelle? No, am I hearing any? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. School committee business? We have none. Correspondence? Karen, what do you got there? Anything good? Any tickets? Ice cream shops? So we've got basically some letters here. All right, nothing. All's good. New business? Any requests for our next meeting? Melissa?
Well, the middle school, the buildings, but I think that was probably tabled because we didn't have the report, so that's gonna be on the next meeting, right, anyways? The middle school, talking about the middle school and the buildings and.
The update?
Well, it
The
wasn't
study
just
or?
the update, it was to look, to start discussion on, or to have discussion on what we're going to be doing.
And to that note, I think as a committee, we need to appoint someone to be part of the town's master plan committee. I'm aware that they've asked one of the committee to have someone join that, the town master plan committee. Anyway,
It's not an appointment we make. They're looking for,
well, I'm they're just asking for a school committee member to take part in the committee, that's all.
as well as the general community.
Yeah, yes, yeah, nothing formal, just to take part in the whole master plan. Apparently in the 2004 master plan of the hundreds of pages, I guess there was one page dedicated to the schools, so we should probably